Mini Man, what's up? What's going on, brother? So we're actually gonna watch My Name is By videos. So this is gonna be a chance if you want to lurk or if you're free, if you want to get caught up on what's to come in episode Heresy. Truly, I would appreciate you hanging around. We'll absorb this stuff together and obviously talk about it as we go.
Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. Short version of a later update that I'll talk about in a different video. I took a month out to deal with some pretty serious burnout. More content across other games will be rolling out starting, well, soon. And I'll be talking more about all that soon, and some other content I'll be making on Destiny. But today, I wanted to get back into the swing of things with what might be a somewhat easier video with familiar ground. And we're going to talk about the finished story of Revenant. To clarify, this is not a video commentating on the state of the game. That is a separate video that I'll make at some point later this week. The short version of that video is, it's not looking good. But that's nothing you needed me to tell you. It's something which is resoundingly being said throughout the community right now. I know that there are a lot of people in my audience, however, who just want to know about what happened so that they can keep up to date. So that's the video we'll be doing
AKA
today.
80% of the Destiny population.
The commentary on the state of the game generally for that other video, and commentary on this story will be at the very end, so if you just want the update, stay tuned. It'll be in the latter half that you want to skip if you're not here for doom and gloom. Which is understandable, because if you just want to get your update and just want to enjoy something, that's perfectly reasonable. For those of you who do want my thoughts, you get a bit of that at the very end. For the really quick summary, Act 3 revolves around the exotic mission, the storming of Fickrell's fortress, and the question of who would eventually become the Kell of Kells and who would claim the Echo. It's got a lot of weird dynamics to it. In the previous part of the episode, in Act 2, Ido and Crow freed Aramis from custody in order to allow her to assist in the hunt for Fickrell. We just found out that Fickrell had raised Skolas, the Kell of the House of Wolves, who had once claimed to be the Kell of Kells. He was now Fickrell's champion of sorts. With Skolas at his side, Fickrell was trying to make a claim for the mythological Kell of Kells title. A mythical prophecy of the House of Rain spelled out that the Traveler itself would choose a Kell of Kells, a sort of prophetic leader that would lead all of the Elixni people.
For all those in chat, how excited are you for episode Heresy?
Fickrell's claim to this legendary title
how epic does it feel? 1 to 10. 10 is off the charts. 1 is snooze fest. How do you guys feel?
We also learned of the song within the echo, a voice which was singing a dirge of Old Reese, a voice which was supposedly of Old Reese itself, the Elixni homeworld. This voice was looking for a new bearer for the echo, one that was worthy of its power, unlike Fickrell, who was simply looking to defile the Elixni people. This finally leads us to the starting point of Act 3 proper. In Act 3, we discovered Fickrell's fortress far off in the Tangled Shore's edges, and went there in a series of excursions. This old awoken watchtower had been converted into Fickrell's lair,
Me personally,
and showcased how far
I
his
would
mastery
say I'm
of
like
the Echo had really
an
gone.
8.
Before embarking upon
I
our
only was
first
a 10
expedition,
when,
Ido gave us a frame for a shotgun that would turn
back
into
when
the
we were going to
Slayer's
fight the
Fang,
Witness during
an
that whole
exotic
era there.
which would
I was
harness
really
power
amped.
from Fickrell's fortress.
I took that entire
Throughout the
week off,
castle,
paid time off from
there were
work.
mirrors
That
that
was
were
truly
illuminated
remarkable.
by terrifying cracks. When these fragile gateways of refracted light had been destroyed or fractured by weapons fire, they would create a gateway into an alternate, refracted dimension which had been created by the Echo, a mirror dimension of sorts. Everything was backwards. These would eventually empower Ido's shotgun frame and demonstrated Fickrell's mastery of the Echo, as it was a place of both light and darkness, much like the Echo itself. It bordered on our reality and contained the revenant essence required to destroy the more powerful Scorn within the fortress. Speaking of which, the Fanatic was keen to ensure that there were powerful opponents that would face us in battle, and so began to resurrect a great number of the old Scorn that we had once slain. The Mad Bomber Canucks Two Fingers, the Trickster Araskes, the Mindbender Hyrax, and the Hangman Rexis Varn were all risen again to fight over the course of our expeditions into the castle. But at first, when we reached Fickrell's throne room, it was clear that there was no way of actually damaging him. But it seemed that there might finally be an answer to this problem thanks to Ido's tonics. Fickrell, for those of you who've forgotten, is functionally immortal, a Scorn that has been created via wish magic, and someone who will simply resurrect over and over again after death. It's actually part of the canon reason why the Hollowed Lair was one of the few strikes we could run on repeat over and over and over again. Ido had been looking into the
That's
old
interesting.
tonics of Reese with the
I didn't know
intent of curing her father of his ailment, where he was persistently being haunted by the spirit of Nezarec. So far, she had done so to little avail, but she had learned things about the fundamental relationship between the Scorn and the Elixni, thanks to Aramis. In particular, she learned that this relationship was defined by their ether. To put it simply, Elixni have normal ether, but with the Echo's power, that ether could be infused with darkness and turn into dark ether, which in turn would make the Elixni Scorn instead. The Echo is also presumably what allowed Fickrell to do this instantaneously, creating the new Revenant Scorn instead of the old means by which he created them, which required the Elixni to die first. Ido theorized that there was a tonic she could create that would essentially do what the Echo had done in reverse. The tonic, if ingested into Fickrell, would turn his dark ether into normal ether, rendering him mortal momentarily, and also momentarily turning him back into an Elixni. In this moment, we would have to strike. Creating this tonic would not be easy, and required assistance from Aramis and from one whose knowledge of Old Reese was even more ancient than hers, and whose mastery of tonics was truly something artful. Luckily, Aramis knew of one such individual in Scorn custody, Ixis the Apothecary. Ixis was being held by Fickrell beneath his throne room, and whilst she wasn't willing to work alongside humanity, Aramis and Ido's presence was enough to sway her to assist the Elixni generally. Ixis would assist Ido with creating her tonic, with the knowledge that Fickrell would probably keep her alive for the time being, as the transformation from an Elixni to a Scorn would remove all of her great accumulated wealth of knowledge. Ixis also stated that she actually preferred to live with the Scorn rather than join humanity, and the House of Light in the Last City. That goes to show how little some Elixni still think of humanity. With Ido's tonic crafted and with a special injector device made to deliver it into Fikrul's heart directly, we had a chance to unseat this would-be Kell of Kells at last. But this left a single issue in its wake. The next would-be Kell of Kells, Mithrax, who was not entirely himself. He had become more and more unstable as time was progressing. His body and soul were clearly being possessed by Nezarec, and the affliction that had been presented by the curse of Nezarec was growing greater with each passing day. For those of you who forgot, back in the season of the Plunder, this is something that is in fact not well explained, but it is noted that Nezarec's curse was transferred to Mithrax in the moment when he distilled that darkness from the relics that we collected over that season. This allowed for that infusion that healed Osiris, the fabled Nez Cafe, but the actual Nezarec part of the relic's darkness was infused into Mithrax's soul, leaving him with this really gnarly affliction. By this point that we were raiding the fortress of Fikrul, Mithrax was only with us half the time, and was not always lucid. When he wasn't present, Nezarec was, and in those moments Nezarec spoke with a darker tone in Mithrax's voice, openly proclaiming the pain that he would leave the Elixni in when he began his terrible rule through Mithrax. When Mithrax did regain consciousness briefly, he asked us to protect the Elixni from him if the corruption truly took hold of him in an irrevocable way. As Mithrax put it, he would not defeat Fikrul, only to become him. When we did enact our final assault, we did manage to defeat the fanatic. When his dark ether turned into normal ether, when Fikrul passed back from Scorn to Elixni, and when he faded from this mortal coil, his final words were simply, "Who will care for my children?" But as the fanatic fell, his scepter began to hover. It was directly between two contestants for the greatness of its power. Mithrax and Aramis were both present, and both of them lunged for the echo. In a blinding flash of light, it made a choice. We were transported alongside Aramis to a vision showing something of old Reese in its glory days, from the age of heroes, as Aramis put it. The echo of Reese had chosen her to be its bearer, and apparently it wanted her to be the one that would bear it forth and rebuild the Elixni homeworld. When the vision ended, Aramis faced down Nezarec. The scepter was in her hand. The overwhelming presence of the final god of pain that was still residing within Mithrax surged within the Kell of Light, and he made a move for the scepter that was firmly within Aramis's grasp. As he lunged, Aramis reacted. She could have simply left in that moment, but instead, using the combined light and darkness of the echo, Aramis purged Nezarec's presence from Mithrax and saved his life. With the echo having been claimed and Fikrul having been defeated, Aramis and Mithrax took their places as the bearers of the echo and the Kell of Kells respectively. The two would have separate responsibilities to the Elixni people, and the Kell of Kells would not be the one to bear the echo after all. Aramis departed the system with one of her catches, leaving behind her role as the Kell of the House of Salvation forever. She went to rebuild a home for the Elixni, with the echo in hand and a catch at her back. Mithrax, Spider, Varix, and Ido were left to rebuild the Elixni people in Sol under the House of Light, with the Kell of Kells as their leader. Crow was able to put the greatest shame of Aldrin's past to rest, after having finally conquered the fanatic and having put Fikrul to rest. So, that's what happened in Revenant Act 3. So, what are my thoughts? If you were just looking for the recap, it's probably time to switch off. Before I start, I want to say that I'm coming back to this after having taken a long break. You'll have noticed that for about a month or so there's been very little content on the channel, with the exception of a few T-Slapes. Yeah, I burnt out hard and I needed time away from everything generally. The Dragon Age project really burned me out. I do, however, recommend doing this generally because games are for playing and for fun, and if you aren't enjoying a game, you shouldn't have to treat it like a chore, so yet again I will remind everyone that it's okay to take a break and come back to a game when you enjoy it. That point aside though, I am looking at Revenant's story with a fresher set of eyes, and have taken time out, and I still have to say, some of the narrative choices here are baffling. It feels kind of all over the place. I do think that a lot of people looked at Aramis's side of the story within this episode and just did not like it. It's very much not an objective point because this is very much an opinion-based thing, but I think it's fair to say that a bunch of people within the community have the opinion that Aramis did not deserve a redemption arc. This is based...
And I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. It feels like we're bringing a villain up again, that we're bringing them to rise in fame or some kind of recognition they don't have deservedly. I can name one other person or character in this story, but I'm sure you can think of who that person is, as they are currently at the tower or play a role in the Vanguard, the Hunter Vanguard to be more specific. So yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Based purely on the fact that she shows very little contrition whenever we interact with her, and also because I think, well, a lot of people are actually really tired of everyone having a redemption arc in Destiny. There is this persistent idea that everyone can be redeemed, and honestly, no, I don't think that's what the community wants. It feels very naive and optimistic to think that everyone can indeed turn out to be a good guy. I have to also say, and this is not an Act 3 commentary bit, it's more of an Act 2 one, but Ido's plan again of freeing her, very out of left field, and even with her good faith in people, it came across as way too naive. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it's out of character for her. It felt very forced as a result. That's my perspective, but let me explain it. People often see Ido as someone who is naive, and a lot of the writing tries to portray her as naive. However, there is also a very fine point to that, because the naivety is just how you look at it through the opening lens. Ido is the scribe of the House of Light. She is clearly an intelligent person. However, she doesn't see it as naivety, and oftentimes it's proven that she simply sees the potential good in people, the best in people. And that's what she's really doing. Oftentimes, when she puts trust in someone, it's because she understands that they have a good chance of turning and becoming something better for the sake of everyone involved. However, that doesn't square with what's being done here. Back in the Season of Defiance, Aramis did save Mithrax. There is some good in her, but after having done that, you know what she said to him? "We're even now." And then she just leaves. She is out. She does nothing more for the rest of her time. She basically abandons the entire pursuit of anything to do with the darkness and the witness. She is effectively a non-factor in that story, and when she's captured again at the beginning of Revenant, she's kind of out for everyone's blood. She does not care. She just basically wants nothing to do with any of these people, and is willing to call us all effectively enemies. The only thing that is redeeming about her is the fact that she's uniting with us in order to stop the Scorn, but at no point is that properly emphasized, and it certainly isn't emphasized enough by Ido, who, if she is looking to go ahead and free Aramis for good reasons, would cling to this point immediately and would fight for it wholeheartedly. More importantly, it would be something she would need to convince us of, quite clearly, and not in some side note where she gets mistaken for naivety, but with the actual intelligence that she clearly has. It's one of those things where I'm sure it's just down to the way that things were written, but this just did not sit right with me generally. I think this does Ido poorly. I think that she would have been able to do this in a much better manner. I think she should have been able to actually convince Crow, actually convince all the other members of her house, Maybe only have Mithrax in his Nezarec-esque state shout her down, and have people realize that, yeah, this is actually a good idea if the malefactor is someone who's saying it wrong. I'd also have had Aramis been a little different here, to give her the possibility of actually showing contrition. Like, there's a line where it's mentioned that as part of her prison sentence, the Vanguard offered her a therapist. And again, I brought this up previously, but crazy and perhaps as predictable as that might have ended up being, I can imagine a different storyline where she'd at least have contemplated it or even said yes. And you know, that might have changed things. Maybe it would have been better also if the actual song that everyone could hear from the Echo in Act 2 spoke specifically to Aramis. After all, she does end up claiming it. So, yeah, I don't know, there just wasn't enough give and enough take on either side of that plan to make it feel, it just didn't feel right.
I agree. And what do you think, guys? Did it kind of seem a little bit far left field, the way the approach was, and the Ido, like, extreme optimacy and extreme, like, risk taking and believing in and going all in on Aramis? How did you guys feel about that? I'd like to just see your discussion on that.
Also, this is not at all a structural point, it's just kind of funny. When you do start Act 3, Aramis is back in jail. So, yeah, okay. Moving on though, let's talk about the Apothecary. This was dropped into the story very much at the last minute, and it solves what is honestly one of Destiny's longest running problems, which is Fickrell's immortality. It's kind of the sort of strange get out of jail free card that Fickrell has always had, and I feel like the emphasis on Fickrell's immortality needed to kind of be more emphasized. The fact that he is immortal is the major problem with him doing all of this stuff, but it's not really approached at first. It's something that's just left in the background as an unstated bit that we just needed to solve at some point. And I feel like that should have been more of a focus, you know? It's kind of weird to then see the Apothecary appear out of nowhere as an answer to this in just a few lines of dialogue. And she's not really developed much as a character outside of the few lines of dialogue which we see. I would also have loved to see an actual character here, not just a door that doesn't open. That being said, I haven't played through enough versions of the Exotic Mission. I've just completed Act 3's story, so maybe you do see someone. I don't know. It's a big open question there. I will sit there and say too that the way that Revenant has been deconstructed for the sake of the experiment, which we'll talk about in a bit, yeah, it's really not helped the Apothecary story here, because there are lines that feel like they appear out of order for all of this. People are talking about the Apothecary as though we know about her before she's actually introduced in dialogue, which ends up just being very weird and baffling, and it just doesn't make much sense. It's fine, but it is very much a, oh, this introduces it and solves the biggest issue of the entire thing very much at the last minute, which is frustrating too, because this has kind of been Fickrell's deal. Killing the fanatic who is immortal is kind of a big problem. Anyway, there are other things, and I think the biggest thing that stems from all of this as a problem is the way that the experiment ended up going. I have better hopes for Heresy when it comes to this, because there was more time to actually do things, and it's not quite the same as what's going on with Revenant, I'm sure. That being said, I'm ready to be proven wrong on that, and I say that partly because, well, while the experiment that was made with regards to how to do seasonal story was followed through with good faith and goodwill, and whilst it is more respectful of people's time, I think that Revenant's leg of the experiment with the story structure that Revenant had has clearly failed. Maybe all this proves is that for this 3-act structure where everything is dropped all at once, you need to have content that's built bespoke with that in mind, as opposed to content that's cut back down into something which fits into that time slot. I don't know.
I am not
Maybe
playing
all
right
of
now.
this
I'm
is
just
going to be changed in Heresy,
you know,
but
tuning in
honestly,
with you guys on
this
these videos.
does not work. In particular, I think this
If
episode,
you mean in general,
and
Destiny
this
2,
act,
yes,
it
I have
revealed
certainly been
itself
playing,
with
yes.
the constant running back and forth to receive different people's voice calls, where realistically this could all have been one conversation. At one point, I spoke to Ido within her tonic laboratory, only to go over to the terminal next to me and talk to her again. Like, what? I mean, yeah, clearly this is the result of the experiment and the fact that they had to cut these things down, it seems clear that all of this was designed with an activity between these things, and the narrative had to be delivered in this time, and there was no time to actually change any of it. However, this is why I'm holding out for Heresy on these particular ones, because this feels like it's only proved that Revenant's major story, which was clearly meant to take place over weeks, much like the old stuff, does not fit with the whole theme of crushing it all together into one. If you're going to make a content model, again, this just proves that you should make it bespoke for that content model. So we'll see. I don't know how this goes, but yeah, that's the big learning of the experiment thus far. If it is continued for Heresy, hopefully it will be better because it is built bespoke, but again, we'll have to see. The community's consensus seems to have flipped back firmly in the other direction, whilst old me is somewhat vindicated for that. I will sit there and say that it does not fix the bigger problem generally, which is that the narrative structure should be made to surprise and delight and should not be the same structure over and over again. Different structures for different stories and ever-evolving structures for an ever-evolving world, I think, needs to be the kind of modus operandi for this going forward. Again, that's a lot of backseat dev talk. I don't know what really works best. We had the seasonal structure for a long time and it worked for a long time. Maybe there is some truth to that, and maybe we're all just very fatigued and tired by it. Finally, Mithrax is the Kell of Kells now, but I feel like that story beat was finished in a rather underwhelming way because he's Kell of Kells by default, because he's the last Kell standing. The prophecy of the Kell of Kells is a big thing within Elixni mythology and lore. It's something where the Traveler itself is supposed to have chosen this Kell, where all Ketches and all servitors will bow before them. Eramis chose to spare him. The only thing that came close to choosing Mithrax was the beam of light that came from the Echo. This is not the Traveler choosing him. This is a part of the Traveler and a part of the Witness, whatever's left over in that Echo, choosing to spare him. And that's only the best interpretation of it, because realistically the Echo is a tool that in the moment was used by Eramis. The Traveler did not choose Mithrax, and it feels therefore like the myth is kind of invalidated. Like, I mean, the whole point of the entire thing of Fickrell claiming this myth and him being seen as illegitimate was partly because of the fact that he was trying to claim it by wiping all the other options out. It's based on the idea that no, the Traveler didn't choose him, he's choosing himself through tyranny. And Mithrax has unwittingly picked up that same baton. You know, this would have been one of those moments where I would have loved to see the Traveler actually do something.
One way or another, I would rather it be Mithrax as the Kell of Kells, certainly, than Fickrell. I'm sure you all would agree, unless you have some satanic view on the world, which, you know, hope is really not the case. But yeah, he's absolutely right there. He was not chosen by the Traveler. He was sort of just handed it to him on a silver platter, as he is the only remaining Kell. So it is still the Kell of Kells, nonetheless.
You know, this silent god that, once again, does nothing. Yeah, it makes sense that there was one extraordinary act which it's actually moved for, and that's Cade sacrificing himself to bring back our ghost. But I would have loved to have actually seen this pan out, you know? Have the Echo make a petition to the Traveler as a part of it. I don't know, the what-if situation for this is going to be discussed to death, but in my mind this really doesn't do the Kell of Kells storyline justice. Eramis just chose to spare him, he wasn't chosen by the Traveler, and now he's Kell of Kells by default. It kind of devalues the entire mythology around it, and I feel like more could have been done with what's been built up by House Rain. There are some other things to mention here, but all of them are relatively unimportant in the big picture of things. These are things like enemies and bosses being repeated, and whilst this is absolutely a narrative critique, it is a gameplay issue too, and I think it's something that is not as pressing as all the other things that have brought us here. I think that you can indeed do repeated enemies in a tasteful, even fun, even exciting way, but I don't think it's done here in Revenant. It kind of feels like it's, well, just done by default. I mean, hell, when Savathun got resurrected inside of Season of the Witch, actually a really cool moment. I know that we all have bad memories of that because of the layoffs and the way that the community felt about all that at the time being.
True.
But legitimately, it was a very cool moment. And, well, the Hangman and all the Scorn Barons being brought back one more time, well, it just doesn't have that same oomph. What I will say, though, is that this isn't to say that Bungie's team can't develop new enemies. I mean, take a look at all the Dread, for example. And more to the point, in this exotic mission, take a look at the Screeb Broodmother. That's a horrifying, cool concept that combines two enemies. I love the idea, it's terrifying, and it brings back the vaunted mini-Screeb. Ugh, nasty. But all of it is to say that, yeah, I think that Bungie can firmly design new combatants and enemies. It's just a case of maybe rebalancing how much that's done, and also potentially looking at where that is in the list of priorities. I imagine that it's not easy, considering that the Dread took however many years to actually materialize. Individual new combatants are possible, but I think it's all about finding the variety of space and how those things mechanically interact with this sandbox and the rest of what we're doing that really matters here. I also imagine that there's a big point of enemy redundancy. What I mean by that is that if they don't design enemies that are meaningfully different enough, then they might as well have not designed them at all. I imagine that it's tricky to design different kinds of enemies that do different things, that meaningfully alter the sandbox. Now, that's just me trying to sit there and look into what the game design problem might be. I'm not a game dev, so I don't know. Regardless, I don't think that's the biggest issue plaguing the game right now.
It is certainly
I think
not.
the stuff that I mentioned earlier is all episode specific. I think there are bigger issues on the horizon, which I'll talk about in another video. So, did the episode's story do anything good? Well, yeah, absolutely. There were definitely things to enjoy about it. The expansion of the lore around Reese and the Elixni was a really nice thing to touch on, especially seeing as Aramis is now likely returning there or creating a new version of Reese in the future. It's awesome to see the Garden Way lore book in particular, which again, I need to cover, but I burned out before I could. I have the entire thing ready to go in a script, I just need to get some other stuff out of the way first. I also think it's really nice to see a plot point tied off for a change. A lot of the time Destiny leaves these hanging plot threads, and it is good to finally see something tied off. I do, however, stand by the fact that it would have been nicer to see all these threads tied a little better. Aramis leaving to go ahead and rebuild Reese is somewhat sullied by the fact that a lot of people don't believe she deserved a redemption arc. Subjective, but ultimately, that's fine and that's to everyone's own opinion. I've talked already about why I think Mithrax as the Kell of Kells hasn't landed quite well, and I've also talked about how the Apothecary being the linchpin of Fikrul's defeat is also not perfect, but regardless, I do think it's good that we're actually tying off plot points. That was the objective of this episode, and they seem to have done that for sure. The Scorn are probably still around to be manipulated, once again by some other great enemy, but the Fanatic is finally dead, which is nice because we so rarely see a final enemy death. I mean, look at Aramis in Beyond Light. You know, she froze up and that was all dramatic, and then she just came back later in Season of the Plunder.
Exactly.
The spaces built for this episode might be panned as a reskin by some, but honestly,
let's hope we don't see the Witness be resurrected.
Especially for the exotic mission. If it's aiming for this creepy, haunted Castlevania vibe, it hits that stuff in a very clearly Destiny fashion, and it hits it 10 out of 10. The aesthetic of Destiny has almost always been fantastic, and it has to be said, the organ is a really cool touch. It's not the horror show that was Presage, but it's still really effective for what it's going for.
He meant to say
despite the fact that it is conceptually just an even more inverted version of Duality's Nightmare Realm, I do think that the mirror dimension for this exotic mission is pretty cool, even if it's only distinct by its aesthetic and the puzzles that you do with the exotic within it. Whilst I do wish we had seen more of him in the episode, I did enjoy Nezarek's presence, though it is a thing that leaves me hoping desperately for more, because Nezarek conceptually is an awesome presence within Destiny's universe. The way that his character is presented isn't always enough to give him the on-screen malice that I think his lore has been given and deserves. The way that he gets defeated at the end of the episode, is actually pretty fitting too. It's one of my favorite parts about the entire thing, and not just because it's a really cool cutscene. It's the specific energies that defeat him, a combination of the energies of light and dark, which harkens back to the raid. Yes, this is very much one of those moments where Root of Nightmares showed us that in order to defeat Nezarec in the final boss fight, you needed the presence of both light and dark energy. And lo and behold, the Echo is what defeated Nezarec, a combination of the light and the dark. Very neat. Very well done. I love the symmetry there. But all of these good points aside, don't change the reality that there's something wrong with Destiny as a whole right now. I'll be talking more about it again in the next video on the state of Destiny. The short version is that we're all inevitably going to be thinking the exact same thing right now, which is that Destiny has effectively endgamed itself. Digging out of this hole is a totally different order now, and the reality has started to set in. Either way,
let me just say, after hearing that, I'm actually a bit more optimistic on the future of Destiny 2 in the franchise, with the knowledge that Destiny 3 is pretty much far-fetched to the point where it will not happen. I am very, very optimistic that Heresy will bring a very good introduction to what could possibly be the next big villain in this franchise. The amount of lore that's going to be spilling over, the amount of, let's just say, cinematic artistry will be off the charts, as we're all acquainted with. And let's just try to ignore the noise for all my hardcore Destiny enthusiasts in this chat right now. You've been with the franchise for over 10 years. Myself, 7. I didn't play Destiny 1 as much. I've only played it a very short period of time, but let us believe in optimism that the future is bright. And even though Revenant was sort of rushed, and there's no denying that, there is something great right around the corner. So I'm really excited for it. I am.
Okay, that's where we are, and that's where we'll be leaving things for now. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed.
Stick around.
If you did, go ahead
there
and
will be
leave a
plenty
like.
more to come.
And if you
Stick
want more
around,
content,
guys.
I am returning now after
We're
having
not going
taken
anywhere.
quite the hiatus. So I will be back with more. In the meantime, though, if you did enjoy the video and if you want more lore from worlds both near and far, go ahead and hit
Again,
subscribe.
guys, if you haven't already,
and the bell
subscribe
next
to My Name is
subscribe to
Bife on
turn on
YouTube.
those
Please do
email
yourself a favor and do
notifications.
so.
We are approaching the weird number
The
of
Lord Daddy
1.1
awaits
million.
you.
Strange to sit there and see that happening, but it would be nice to continue growing, even after all this time. That being said, know that as per usual, your viewership as always is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name has been My Name is Bife. Arodacia Arastra. I'll see you, Starside.
Stay tuned, guys. There's more to come.
Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. So, I didn't quite think we'd be talking about this so soon, but here we are. As it turns out, there are some new details on the new dungeon that have been revealed, and it's gotten me looking with a fair bit more anticipation than I had at Heresy. Bleak as the times may be for Destiny right now, it's cool to see that there are still bangers releasing here and there. And, well, maybe this follows in the vague footsteps of Vesper's host. Maybe this is actually going to be a really cool dungeon. So, let's go ahead and break down everything that Bungie revealed recently about this new dungeon called Sundered Doctrine. Spoilers, of course, if you hadn't already guessed. Starting off, we need to head to the TWID. It's here that we get the following details revealed about the new dungeon. Quote, Heresy is right around the corner, and with it comes the launch of a new dungeon. On Friday, February 7th, travel to Savathun's throne world and infiltrate Rulk's pyramid ship in the new dungeon, Sundered Doctrine. To celebrate the launch, we're issuing a challenge to the top fire teams in the world with the Sundered Doctrine Dungeon Race. That's nothing new. Dungeon races have been happening now, well, since Vesper's host. so it's not surprising that they'd continue it after the success of the last one. However, then there's the following. All Fireteam members must acquire the Drowning Labyrinth quest to enter the dungeon. So we have a few things to go off there, and they are already kind of interesting. First of all, heading back to Savathun's throne world is always bound to land us in some kind of horrifying hive or darkness-based shenanigans, but with this explicitly heading back to Rolk's pyramid, yeah, this is going to get spicier than usual.
Oh yeah.
First of all, the name of both the dungeon and the quest offer us some insight at what might be happening here. So, I guess it's worth first asking, whose doctrine is being sundered, and is there any relevance for the description of this dungeon as being a part of the Drowning Labyrinth quest? From what we know about Heresy, the entire point of the episode is to tip the whole of the Hive pantheon on its head. The very name implies that we'll be countermanding the sword logic, doing something unthinkable. For the mainstream Zivor Wrath-aligned Hive, who haven't strayed from their old ways, Heresy is many things, from showing pity for an opponent to negotiating what might be considered a reasonable peace treaty with them. But the greatest heresy one can commit as a Hive is, of course, necromancy. It's a sin so grievous that when the Taken King Oryx discovered his own son Nokris had been learning it, he banished him forever from the Hive realms and removed every single record of him from the Hive's histories entirely. There was no mention of him in the world's grave. The only reason Oryx wasn't completely successful in this endeavor was because of a single statue in his own throne world at the Dreadnought, which he couldn't destroy. This was, for the longest time, our only hint to Nokris's existence. So why am I bringing this up? Well, I think I'm bringing it up because of the fact that for someone to commit heresy, it's kind of similar or comparable to sundering one's doctrine, in this case a religious or spiritual doctrine. The Hive of Zivor Wrath's brood.
To sunder something means to split it apart, by the way, in case you were wondering.
Still holds this truth. There is another oft-forgotten group that also holds on to these truths, and that's the Worm Gods. Their belief in such things, in fact, predates the Hive's belief. The belief in such things, as you might remember, is called the sword logic. So, if sundered doctrine is another example of what would be considered heresy to the Hive and the Worm Gods, then perhaps someone or something is being resurrected within the pyramid ship. What exactly, or who exactly? Well, my best guess isn't who you might initially think. It isn't Rolk.
My guess right now would be Oryx. I have reasons for saying that, but Resurrection, Pyramid Ship, and Heresy itself. So to go against the darkness by means of the light via the Echo, the only thing I can think of right now is the Taken King, Oryx.
It's his prime captive that my mind wanders to, the progenitor of the many worms that he experimented on, the so-called Worm Mother, Sita. No, not Chaita, as I previously pronounced it all the way back in the times of, like, Witch Queen. As it turns out, when you hear something the first time in-game, that's kind of got to be the default pronunciation. Say hi to all the Atheon fans for me. And besides, this way, it's less likely for me to get demonetized, as whenever I say Shaita, it's, well, you can probably make that one out for yourselves. For those of you who don't know, Zeta is the mother of all Worm Gods. She was one of the last survivors of the war on Fundament that cast her and her children into the deepest reaches of its oceans.
And if I'm not mistaken, if I could just go back in this video, Sita is the worm that we saw right underneath here, powering Rolk here on this platform.
For me. And besides, this way, it's less likely for me to get demonetized, as whenever I say Shaita, it's, well, you can probably make that one out for yourselves. For those of you who don't know, Zeta is the mother of all Worm Gods. She was one of the last survivors of the war on Fundament that cast her and her children into the deepest reaches of its oceans. She was what was used to fuel Rulk's superweapon, the Upended. And as we defeated the subjugator above this weapon, Zeta was left to die. This is my best guess as to what we'll be facing within the Sundered Doctrine, a worm god reborn and reawakened by some harebrained scheme from somebody, somewhere. Is that the only possibility? Well, no, far from it. The quest, the Drowning Labyrinth, raises an interesting connotation about who we might face.
Think about it. Drowning Labyrinth and a Sundered Doctrine. We know worm gods were in the oceans. Drowning Labyrinth, I think he's got it. He's hit the nail on the head with this one. That could be a really big insight into what's to come in the dungeon, which is less than a week away. But truly, if you review what he's saying here, he's got a great point. Great points, I should say.
The use of the word drowning is one associated with both Rulk and the worm gods. You shall drift, you shall drown in the deep is a classic line of Zol, one of the worm gods. Meanwhile, Rulk also has lines involving drowning. In particular, his first challenge to us when we approach his pyramid ship in Vow of the Disciple. You know that line? Rise from the deep, or drown in it. So, it is possible that Rulk is being resurrected here. But how likely is that? Well, I think it's substantially less likely, but it's not impossible. I'm making this based on an assumption that his remains were kind of removed from the pyramid and potentially have been nuked. This is a big assumption, and we really don't know what the state of the pyramid is after the missions where we went to re-enter it at the end of Witch Queen's kind of content cycle. You know, those points at which you just go in and you hear all the different dialogue pieces. You've got like 10 minutes in that area to explore them all and listen to Rulk. Yeah, that mission shows us nothing about Rulk's body, but the lore around Vow of the Disciple tells us a lot. In particular, there are materials from the pyramid ship that got transported out. This included canisters filled with something rather nondescript, save for its appearance as a black fluid substance. The Guardian carrying these vials crashed on Mars, and the materials leaked out, attaching to his body and creeping up his wounded extremities, strangely enough, seeming to heal them as they went. However, this wasn't a benevolent thing. There was a malicious voice attached to it, a voice that I think we can assume was Rulk, but is not actually guaranteed to be so. It spoke in his similar parlance at very least. It's impossible to know because it was never truly confirmed, but what we do know is that the Guardian in question wasn't going to find out. They blew up their Sparrow's power supply and set off a small nuclear explosion in proximity to themselves, wiping out not only their own body but also whatever remained of this black fluid substance. So was that what remained of Rulk? Well, maybe. I think he might not be coming back if that is the case. But also, it doesn't really confirm anything, because as best we know, his body might still be calcified at the very top of that platform above Zeta and the Upended. It leaves that big open question about whether the pyramid is in fact the correct location to find Rulk's body. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but no matter what happens, I'd say that whatever the black goop was, if that was Rulk, would point to the idea that he is significantly more dead than he was before, especially now that he seems to be a lot more crispy and ionized than he was before we even beat the snot out of him. So this could be about Rulk, it could be about Zeta, but it could be about neither of them, because this is Rulk's pyramid. It's worth exploring for a lot of other things than the dead bodies that you find within it. Rulk's pyramid is a cornucopia of strange artifacts with potentially dangerous stuff to explore, so let's just go ahead and talk about some of these things. First of all, there is the possibility that the ship itself is actually still alive. What do I mean when I say that? Well, as we learned in the final shape, the pyramid vessels aren't just ships. They have some kind of yearning and consciousness. They reach out, they react to other presences, they are in a strange way kind of sentient. We learned this in the Final Shape's ghost missions, that without the witness guiding them, they are left without someone to control them and direct them. There is a yearning for a mind to do so.
A point that's
In
been brought up
particular,
many
this is in the
times since
final
defeating
days
the witness.
quests, where you get the visitation mission. It's the one where you revisit the lunar pyramid from the end of Shadowkeep. If this is true of Nezarek's pyramid on the moon, then it might be true of Rolk's pyramid in Savathun's throne world as well. Even Rolk's cursed and damaged vessel is something to seriously consider. After all, a single pyramid vessel, even if it's been grounded, has more advanced technology than anything we've ever seen. If each one is sentient and is looking for a new master, we should anticipate that the pyramid itself is the prize in all these schemes. After all, it's part of the reason why we denied it to the Scorn for so long. And as a result, there could be a bunch of different parties looking to invade it and possibly take it over. That includes the Scorn, but it could also include the Dread, the Shadow Legion, or Xivo Arath's Hive forces. And should one of them be able to raise this mighty ship and somehow drag it from the throne world, I mean, we're in a lot of trouble. As a quick reminder of the scale of power of some of these vessels, you have certain points at which their defenses were tested. In particular, Ashamir on Io fired a whole bunch of different weapons at them, and it turns out they don't have some kind of sophisticated shielding system. They have more like what I'd call a teleportation barrier. Essentially, when a round is about to hit the pyramid, it's teleported out before it can do so and is sent to a harmless plane. Imagine the same thing happens, except with all sorts of weapons. You could literally launch a nuke at the pyramid ships, and the nuke wouldn't go off, because it would just be snapped into existence in another dimension, and would be rendered mostly harmless. So, yeah, there's your big problem with enemies having a pyramid ship. That's just one example of the defenses that they have, and that's to say nothing of the weapons that they hold. Mighty gravity generators that were capable of literally tearing planets in half. And if we're to believe that the power of the darkness extends into these vessels, it's possible that they could, in some long-winded harebrained scheme, be used to power something greater. We'll get onto that when we talk about the Upended. Beyond just the pyramid itself, Rolk's pyramid is filled with valuable relics, and I'm not just talking about those stolen from the Vault of Glass or distilled from pure taken energy, but then there is the most obvious and powerful relic, a relic for which he has received one of his many titles, a relic above which we finally destroyed him. That big old floating cube, the Upended. We still don't know precisely how this broken superweapon operates, or what it does, but we know that whatever it is, it was capable of sealing Savathun's throne world from the light, and that gives me an idea of what it might do. I think this is a superweapon that's using the power of the darkness and the witness, and the power of taking in particular. If the Upended transports things, as the action of taking does, to a place sealed from the light, then perhaps it seals them in a pocket dimension of pure darkness energy, where they can be corrupted and destroyed. We've been to pockets of dark space like this, most notably on the Presage mission. It's worth remembering as well that one of the first lines Savathun said as Osiris when we explored that vessel was simply, "There is no light here." So what if that's what the Upended does? It quite literally turns worlds upside down, Stranger Things style, transporting whole planets into dimensional pockets, like the one we found in Presage. And let's be honest, that would not be unheard of in terms of the power of the Witness and the Black Fleet either. I mean, take a look at what happened to Mars, Titan, Mercury, and Io. The Witness literally abducted them. Who's to say the Upended isn't the means by which that was done?
They were literally wiped off the map.
Maybe every pyramid vessel has a relic like this within it. Maybe Rolk particularly likes them. Maybe it's a distillation of some of the power that the Witness was able to wield into an ability that would allow Rolk to do the same. Who knows? If we're going to consider the dangers someone might seek out within the pyramid, superweapons like the Upended rank pretty high on that list. And then, finally, I think we need to look at the strange curiosities that are still within Rolk's domain. But much as we were exploring his pyramid ship in great detail when it came to the raid, we never got to look into the stranger curiosities found deeper within the temple complexes. We never got to see what lies below in the deepest reaches of that place. Our journey through the pyramid when we went to face Rolk was like ascending the steps of a temple to meet a high priest. Perhaps this time we'll be descending into the catacombs to find what monsters roam in the darkness. Should we return here, we will also probably be greeted once more by the stranger things inside the pyramid. The many encased experiments where Scorn were ritually fed the children of Zeta and then held in stasis as a strange mockery of what happened to the Hive. The bone of the long-dead Leviathan, a testament to the might of the Subjugator. And of course, the Prophecy Wall, which seems to have mostly come true, but for its final verse, which remains incomplete as best we know. The exciting thing is that we don't know what'll be inside there, but I for one am looking forward to finding out. Vow of the Disciple is some of my favorite Destiny content across the whole franchise. In my mind, it is a top 3, if not the best raid experience in Destiny, with one of the most iconic villains that was tragically underexplored. And yet, he still has some of the biggest impact on the game. He is so massive and looms so large in my mind that I cannot wait to jump back into his pyramid. Rolk is going to be something we look into more, and I imagine that's based purely on the dungeon alone. So we may get to lift the veil a little more and discover some more about Rolk's past. If that somehow connects to the Vanguard probe that was dispatched in the direction of what remains of Lubre, well, this may lead to more interesting places in the future of Destiny. More interesting places than I might have anticipated from Heresy. Anyway, that's all from me for now. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like. And of course, if you want more videos and more content regarding universes near and far, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime,
So again, guys, there could be some pretty firm ground to, if there is a resurrection via the Echo that has landed, that it could be for the worm god that's been underneath the Appended, powering it, that tragically passed when Rolk passed. So tragically is a loose term I'm using, but in any event, keep that in mind as a future kind of like prophecy, that could be a thing. We'll find out soon enough, but certainly given the lore that we've just absorbed together, that could very well hold some ground there.
my name is Bife. Parodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.
Stay tuned, there's still more to come.
Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. While I'm getting back into the groove of videos, and whilst I do have a larger video planned for sometime early next week, talking about the general state of Destiny's story, I figured I'd do a more traditional lore video for all of you guys. And as a result, I'm going to touch on yet more scary Nezarec content. What can I say? I'm a creature of habit, and classic villain content does it for me, particularly when it's one like Nezarec, where honestly, a lot of the time, it's just a really fascinating idea. So, this time we have Nezarec being a quite literal sleep paralysis demon for the Kell of the House of Light, Mithrax. In the process, we see the future that Nezarec wanted to create for the Elixni and the people of the city. So, Nezarec has basically been haunting Mithrax for the better part of a few years now. Whilst this was going on, the longest time it all seemed like things were relatively normal. There were only a few signs that he was even beginning to deteriorate. I think the biggest note is how we saw a little aggression from him over the course of the Final Shape's post-campaign content, in particular when he went after Korha, the Elixni who had murdered his mother all those years ago. But even this aggression wasn't really enough to tip us off to the idea that he was actually being properly haunted and possessed. Of course, we now have a better understanding of why he became haunted. The cutscene at the start of episode Revenant shows us a moment from the end of the Season of the Plunder, where Mithrax distilled darkness from the relics of Nezarec that had been collected over the season. This was made as a means of creating a purer transfusion of darkness. That dark energy and its power over memory and consciousness would be used to wake Osiris from his long slumber. But now it appears that we can see the effects a lot more clearly. By creating and distilling this elixir of darkness, Mithrax seemingly had to separate the influence of Nezarec from that dark energy. It's not hard to see what happened next. The evil influence had to go somewhere, so it went to Mithrax.
It went to Mithrax.
This is perhaps also something that explains the so-called curse of Nezarec, a foul magic that rested upon the relics, bringing death to all those who laid claim to them. Luckily for us, Mithrax has now been cured of this affliction. As it turned out, our own previous method of banishing the final god of pain was actually fairly effective, and was pretty similar to the method used by Eramis in that final moment of Revenant. In Root of Nightmares, we fought Nezarec with the power of the light and darkness. That beam which hits him just before you do DPS is exactly what that's manifesting. It's the reason why you're picking up and connecting the dots going on the left and right hand side, one of which is a group of seeds of light and the other is a bunch of seeds of darkness. Eramis instead used the power of the Echo to do the exact same thing. Using its combined energies of light and darkness, she flayed the very essence of Nezarec from Mithrax's being, removing the influence of the disciple before he could make an attempt to claim the Echo for himself. That's all the better, because if Mithrax had claimed the Echo and subsequently had fallen to Nezarec's influence, there is no telling what could have happened to the world at large.
Absolutely
what we do know
catastrophic.
is that it would have been nothing good for the Elixni. As you continually progress through the fortress of Fikrul, you get dialogue from Nezarec as he manifests momentarily within Mithrax, using his voice to speak his purpose. His simple promise is that he will unleash havoc and ruin upon the Elixni. The exact details of how are somewhat graphic. The idea of scorn rupturing forth from the Elixni is an image that's gruesome when you recognize what's actually happening. For those of you who don't quite understand, the closest analogy, I think, is a little bit like boiling your blood, turning it all to necrotic soup, and then forcing you to open your eyes again as something dead that doesn't recognize anything in the world around it. A new being, born of pain. We do, however, see a moment where these promises are manifested in a more disturbing dream that is perceived only by Mithrax. A dream that is specifically shared to us in the lore tab of the Restless Dreams Ghost Shell from Revenant. Before reading this, I think it's worth pointing out that Nezarec is also a being that generally has used dreams in the past to communicate with his victims. If you're going to look into any of Nezarec's lore, this becomes very obvious. The most recent example outside of Mithrax includes the citizenry of Neomuna, who all suffered regular nightmares up until the point at which we defeated the final god of pain in the Root of Nightmares raid. That lore tab, which features Mithrax's dream, reads as follows. The rigidity in his limbs was unnatural. His breathing was short, quickened as his eyes searched the dark room. Any attempt to crane his neck was impossible. The paralysis had sunk deep into his bones. He sensed a presence. It was a subtle thing, barely noticeable. But Mithrax knew. He tried to speak, but his mandibles did not budge. The darkness in the room breathed. Mizrax strained his eyes to peer towards the edge of the blankets he'd been using as temporary bedding during the development of the Varisis core. Rays of moonlight from a nearby window allowed him to spot the gnarled fingers of a shadowed hand curl and rip into the fabric. A chill accompanied its agonizingly slow ascension up his body, tendrils dancing wildly off its twitching figure. A chorus of whispers rose into a symphony. The entity lifted its head to reveal a ring of eyes. Porn. Its voice echoed within him. Kell of demise, of fear. Intrusive flashes took over his mind. Fire, burning buildings, screaming Elixni. At first, he thought this might have been Reese, a memory that was not his. But instead, he recognized the familiar streets of the lost city. His home. He looked down at his hands, coated in shadows and blood. We will make it their reality. Below him was a body, torn and bloody, with Ido's face. Panic flooded his being. Fear. A mouth grew on this creature's form, icy breaths and rows of sharp teeth dripping with black sludge. No! Mizrax shot up, suddenly free, and blinked to reveal an empty room. The door swung open. Father? Ido was unharmed. Mizrax remained quiet, breathing unevenly, and gazed down at the blankets in time to see wisps of darkness emanating from a few tears in the fabric. The dreams of Nezarec are never something pleasant. Within all of Destiny's lore, wherever they occur, there is one universal aftermath to it, which is that the victim is traumatized, left in a state where sleep is not easy. Insomnia is something that is embraced, as the alternative is terrible. The thing about these nasty dreams isn't just that they represent the possible will of Nezarec, but it's also that more often than not, the final god of pain was very used to getting his way. And so these dreams, presented to others, often ended up being reality in the end. There are others who were driven mad by Nezarec's dreams. Take Briar, for example, a warlord titan who caught Nezarec's attention for his savagery back in the Dark Ages. He was so possessed by the waking dreams and creeping voice of Nezarec that he burned down his own home in solar light. He was fighting off the same shadowed claws and hands that Mithrax saw in his dreams. In the end, it was so terrifying that he cut his own eyes out. Then, there are the many instances involving the Scions, all of whom died at Nezarec's behest. This occurred because the final god of pain appeared by spectre and selected his victims. Soon after this moment, his cultists would claim the victim, and their horrific end was a certainty. The best way I can describe their demise is that Nezarec latched onto them with dark tendrils that attached to their shadows. Then, as their bodies were jolted back and forth, their life force was consumed. It's worth remembering that for a Scion in particular, this is rather horrifying, as they are beings of both material bodies and also of psychic energy. So the idea that they themselves were specifically consumed like this implies that it wasn't just their life force that was consumed, but perhaps their memories. Though, of course, it's difficult to speculate on this particular note, simply because of the fact that we can't tell. The only moment at which we learn about this is from the memories of a scion called Acacia, whose husband and her memories of his passing provide the only proof as to what Nezarec did in the days when he was worshipped by the Scions. All this is to say that Nezarec is a being of an utterly insatiable nature and is difficult to kill. He will doubtless appear in more dreams from here, and I doubt that he has been defeated forever in this moment. We have found a consistent means of banishing him at least, a pure and potent concentration of paracausal energy. In both our instances, darkness and light appear to have been enough to banish his spiritual form and destroy his physical form. It is possible that this can also be accomplished in a lesser way using only darkness, given that Savathun might have used the power of the Veil and Strand in particular to destroy Nezarec during the collapse. Regardless, his nightmarish grasp may still be out there, given that a sufficiently large amount of lore has been written and dedicated to his cultists, who are now presumably led by Michael and Nessa. I think we're still not done with the final god of pain just yet. It's a question that I've posed in similar videos previously about Nezarec. I don't know if you can kill a god. And there are many things in Destiny's universe that qualify themselves as gods, whether correctly or not. The definition is stretched and loose when you take a look at something like Axis, a machine god. You realize that it's only a god in certain definitions. When you take a look at an individual like Oryx, who was planning to become axiomatic with laws of the universe, you realize that he was closer to the real thing. And then there's Nezarec, who has been killed and brought back several times, who has been banished, and who has made his presence clear still. Even after his death, his dissection, his resurrection, his destruction by the Guardians, and now his banishing by the Echo, it isn't clear that he is gone forever. I would anticipate Nezarec still remains. And, as a result, I don't think we're done with the final god of pain, or his nightmares.
What do you think, guys? Do you think we're going to see Nezarec again in some form, be it through a nightmare, some form of a cut scene, or an actual battle where his physical form is resurrected? I wouldn't mind taking his ass down again, but that's just me.
Just yet. But that's all from me for now. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy, go ahead and leave a like, and if you want more lore from worlds near and far, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime,
stay tuned, guys. We've got
my name has been, my name is
come.
Bife. Parodacia Arastra. I'll see you, Starside. Leave that place is unknown. Of course, there could be further characters. Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. So, Heresy is incoming. What are we likely to face? It's meant to be an upending to the entire Hive pantheon, but it's also supposed to be the prelude to everything that's coming next in Destiny. To say that a lot is riding on Heresy is an understatement. In the past, there have been a lot of make-or-break moments for this franchise, and yet again, we are arriving at another one of them here. But Heresy, for what it is worth, feels tangibly different because it needs to establish something completely new. A threat that goes beyond what we've seen thus far, and a promise that there is something out there which is going to present us with a purpose as Guardians once again. With that in mind, I wanted to take a look at everything that we might potentially see in Heresy. So, let's talk about what to expect from this final episode. First things first, for those of you who have been living under a rock and know no context about any of this, let's talk about some base common knowledge that you should probably have. We are certainly in this episode returning to the Dreadnought. The Dreadnought is a vessel that once belonged to Oryx, the Taken King, the father of Crota and brother to both Savathun, the Hive God of Cunning, and Xivu-Arath, the Hive God of War. And of course, he was also the first Hive to ever take control of the Taken. His Dreadnought is also his throne world, or rather was, seeing as we defeated him back in the Taken King expansion. The fact that the Dreadnought is his throne world is a little bit paradoxical. It's something that shouldn't be possible because throne worlds normally are in a different dimension. This one is within our physical reality, and it is a testament to how powerful Oryx was. Something you also might probably not know is that the Dreadnought is made out of the remains of a worm god, Akka, the Worm of Secrets, the worm that Oryx slew. That's mostly what we know, alongside what I said earlier about the fact that the Hive Pantheon is supposedly going to be flipped on its head or shaken around a lot, changed irrevocably. If this does involve the Hive Pantheon, that means that our first real topic of conversation needs to be about the gods that are involved in this. So let's talk about that for a second. Before we Guardians properly came along and started dealing damage to them, the Hive Pantheon was an expansive thing, but there were a few major deities that you could point to. There were, of course, the ones that could collectively be known as the Big Three, the siblings, the progeny of the original Osmium King, the rulers that found themselves at the head of the Osmium dynasty. They were, of course, Oryx, the Taken King, Savathun, the Witch Queen, and Xivu-Arath, the Hive God of War, the three siblings that we mentioned earlier. With Oryx being dead as of the Taken King expansion, it's likely that if this is relating to the gods, that predominantly it will relate to Xivu-Arath and Savathun. But, as I'll talk more about later, we've already got hints from the name of the episode that resurrecting an old Hive God like Oryx isn't necessarily off the table. There are also children of these gods, who are sort of in a weird place of potentially being able to be resurrected, or maybe being able to claim some degree of power. They're not full gods in their own right, and I think a story following them would be a bit weird, but they do have demigod-like powers in some cases, and, well, some of them are directly related to the Dreadnought. See Savathun's daughter, or one of Savathun's daughters, known as Balwa, who was an attendant within the court of Oryx. Or see Ur-Halak and Ur-Anuk, Oryx's own Death Singer daughters, twins that, between the two of them, created the Death Song, Oversouls, and Annihilator Totems, some of the most powerful inventions and weapons of the Hive. Nokris is also dead, but he is probably the most heretical figure we've seen in all of Hive history, at least according to what the Hive might consider to be a heretic. So the chance that he might also be resurrected and might be at the center of this story is a possibility too. Then we have to think about the other gods within the Pantheon, because yes, there are the Big Three, but there's also the Worm Gods. These were the original gods that all the Hive worshipped, and whilst Xivu-Arath, Oryx, and Savathun all rose to prominence and probably overshadowed these gods for the sake of their own power, they are still terrible figures and are technically the gods of all the Hive, including Oryx, Savathun, and Xivu-Arath at the time. So they are very much still important. When we entered onto the scene back in 2014, 4 of the original 5 worm gods were still alive, and of course the worm mother Zeta was still alive. Back in Rolk's pyramid, she was still a captive. The other remaining 4 that still lived were the Everhunger, Aya, the Keeper of Order, Zol, the Will of Thousands, and Yul, the Honest Worm. Akka, the Worm of Secrets, had been killed long ago by Alrix before he became Oryx, the Taken King. The Worm Mother Zeta would also die during the span of Witch Queen, when we fought Rolk above the Upended, which she was supposedly powering. And of course, prior to all of this, we killed Zol back on Mars in Warmind, during the span of, well, a very short campaign, and with the assistance of the Warmind Rasputin. So now we've gone down from 5 worm gods and a worm mother to just 3 worm gods, the Everhunger, Aya the Keeper of Order, and Yul the Honest Worm. As best we know from limited intelligence we have on the subject, Yule is the greatest of the remaining worm gods, so great in fact that he was looking at Zol with the intent of devouring him to obtain his power. Though it does appear that at some point in the past, Aya might also have had a certain degree of authority, and I say this because back in the Books of Sorrow, before the crafting of the Dreadnought had truly taken place, Aya was able to command Oryx to return to his throne world and set his house in order, and Oryx obliged that request. So maybe there is a little authority found within the Keeper of Order still. The worm gods as a whole are in a very interesting position right now, with Xivu-Arath having been weakened and with the Lucent Brood no longer needing to satisfy the blood tithe of their hive worms thanks to the Light of the Traveller. The worm gods are now in a place where they have more authority over some hive, but less over others. Savathun can safely disregard the children of Zeta, but their grip over Xivu-Arath has probably tightened even further, especially after the death of the Witness, who previously would have held dominion over all of them. If a power vacuum has appeared within those darkness-aligned hive, it is possible that the worm gods and Xivu-Arath are in open contest with each other, as is demanded by the sword logic. If we're also going to get even more technical about hive gods and who qualifies, then we also have to at least for a moment consider Eris Morn. Though she gave up her position as the hive god of vengeance at the end of the Season of the Witch, Eris is still a powerful figure to the hive. As Crota's bane back in the earlier days of Destiny, she was a scourge to the broods of Oryx and Crota, commanding the Guardians to victory against all odds. In the more recent days, she is one of the only people who has been able to strike a significant wound to both Xivu-Arath and Savathun. Whilst neither were fatal, both were significant. Eris consumed much of Savathun's power in the moment where she killed the Witch Queen, and subsequently used that power to banish Xivu-Arath from her own throne world, rendering her mortal. The act of doing this went against the nature of the sword logic, and so she forfeited any godlike power that she'd gained from
So let's just review that one more time, because there's very important things here that he just stated.
And who qualifies, then we also have to at least for a moment consider Eris Morn. Though she gave up her position as the hive god of vengeance at the end of the Season of the Witch, Eris is still a powerful figure to the hive. As Crota's bane back in the earlier days of Destiny, she was a scourge to the broods of Oryx and Crota, commanding the Guardians to victory against all odds. In the more recent days, she is one of the only people who has been able to strike a significant wound to both Xivu-Arath and Savathun. Whilst neither were fatal, both were significant. Eris consumed much of Savathun's power in the moment where she killed the Witch Queen, and subsequently used that power to banish Xivu-Arath from her own throne world, rendering her mortal. The act of doing this went against the nature of the sword logic, and so she forfeited any godlike power that she'd gained from Savathun for this act. But she is still one of the most knowledgeable on the hive as a topic, and therefore, even though she doesn't have this power, she is worthy of respect. Nobody within the coalition knows the hive better than Eris, and those third-party sources, such as Toland the Shattered, should not be universally trusted. They have their own agendas, and their intent with our own actions is likely to further those agendas, potentially to our own detriment. So Eris should really be the one with the final say on this matter, and yes, when we talk about hive gods, we should talk about Eris. Finally, and on a note that will persistently come up in this video, we can't talk about hive gods without talking even so briefly about those who aspire to become them, and I think top of that list is Toland the Shattered.
How about that? Toland the Shattered. Who would have thought? This is incredible. Let's listen.
An old warlock who led Eris and her fire team down into the Hellmouth to face Crota, the son of Oryx, and who ultimately got them all killed, including himself. Though that was a part of his plan, he was able to cheat death via the death song of Ur-Yut, and he did so by creating a meager throne world within the Ascendant Plains Sea of Screams, From this place, it's possible that he could reach out and take up the mantle that he suggested we should inhabit, the mantle of the Taken King. You see, Toland has always been a true believer in the sword logic ever since he deduced its infallible nature, and the thing about the sword logic to Toland is that it always demands structure. There is a structure to the idea that there must always be a most powerful one, and when we didn't take up the mantle of the Taken King, he called us squanderers. If Toland could somehow acquire a great degree of power through, say, maybe an echo, then maybe he himself might believe that he has enough power to reach out and find a means of taking up that mantle for himself. Of course, there are further possibilities. If the Hive worship the sword logic and the power it grants them, then they are worshipping at the feet of a power greater potentially than even the Witness. It is worth remembering that they have reached out to it before. Oryx's contact with the Deep itself, as he called it, saw an entity beyond comprehension reaching back and dwelling within an unborn ogre. It spoke to him in a way that is unfamiliar for the Witness, referring to itself as I, not we, representing a singular entity instead of the Witness's plural compound being. It spoke to Oryx as though he was an old friend, and as though he was also that old friend's harsh mentor.
Who could he be talking about?
There is no concrete confirmation of any of this, but it is very likely, based on the verbiage used and the wording that is pronounced, that this was the Winnower speaking to Oryx.
It was the Winnower.
And if the Winnower is going to be the central part of any future saga in Destiny, it makes some degree of sense that its influence starts with the Hive, and potentially even starts on the Dreadnought. Across all the episodes we've seen so far, there is one thing that we know for sure. Every episode has had an echo in it thus far. A source of both darkness and light that was ejected from the Traveler after the moment of...
Now if you take a look here, I'm going to point it out with my mouse cursor, there is an echo right here. There is an echo right here. And there is one right here. 3 in total came out of the Traveler after we defeated the Witness. 1, 2, and 3.
The Witness's defeat. There were 3 echoes, and we have seen the fate of 2 of them thus far. In Echoes, the first episode, we saw that one of them had been claimed by Maya Sundaresh, and she was wresting control over the Vex on Nessus. In Revenant, we saw that Fikrul had claimed a second, and that he was using it to create the Revenant Scorn, and to empower himself and those that followed him. In Heresy, well, we have no idea who's claimed it. We've known that Fikrul would have an echo for a long time, and we knew that the first echo had fallen into the hands of someone, which was eventually revealed to be the Conductor, and then was revealed to be Maya Sundaresh.
So the very first echo, Maya Sundaresh grabbed the echo and was having power over the Vex. The second, Fikrul, was trying to control the Scorn, the Revenant Scorn. And now the third echo, that's a TBD right there, to be determined, but certainly we know that it has landed on the Dreadnought. All right, so Bungie has revealed to us that the third echo has hit the Dreadnought.
But Heresy has remained, well, a mystery. We have no idea who has claimed the echo just yet, but anyone who has claimed it would have the power to influence the Hive Pantheon in a manner that might change them all forever. So, let's talk about possibilities. Who might have claimed the echo? Well, first of all, Xivu Arath. We've never seen the Hive God of War in the flesh, and if Bungie's looking to make a splash with Heresy, they might have decided to make her a central part of the story to the point where they're finally revealing her, and where they're making it so that she claims the echo. If she does claim the echo, then this is unprecedented for her. It not only gives her power over life, but also gives her the ability to use the light, just like Savathun does. And this might be the reason why the episode is called Heresy. After all, claiming the powers of the light in any way other than to devour it would make Xivu Arath a heretic by her own logic and laws. They believe the light to be a weakness. They believe that the darkness must stamp it out.
So there's your first clue. There's our first clue as to why this episode would be named Heresy. I think certainly there is some way to be, established there that it could be Zevurath. My personal guess is I don't think it'll be Zevurath that's gotten control of the Echo. I just don't I don't have this hunch that we're going to have Zevurath be revealed at this part of the Destiny 2 saga, or Destiny itself saga, but down the road, certainly I would hope that it becomes a boss fight. But again, my opinion is I don't think it'll be Zevurath. But Heresy or Heretics would be to go against the darkness by wielding the light. So hopefully everyone has established and made that connection there, that this word in itself is going to play a big part in a precursor as to understanding what's to come. A very, very big future lies ahead.
However, it's worth remembering that claiming the light like this might represent a major break in Zevurath as a person, and I don't mean that to say that the character isn't well written. I mean it to say that she has gone through one of the more traumatic things that a hive god might possibly have to endure. Being banished from your own throne world and losing your ability to be immortal is something that will absolutely have set her on the back foot. This might have left her weakened and desperate, and that might lead her into a place where she is perhaps desperate enough to be willing to betray everything that she's ever believed in. Especially with the defeat of the Witness, the supremacy of the darkness is now in question for her, and I imagine that if she claims the Echo, it would undoubtedly be something that allows her to pursue the sword logic with both light and darkness, and thus, to some she is a heretic, even perhaps to herself. But she is still trying her best to live as she is meant to. This is the interesting point, I think, that gets brought up by Zevurath claiming it entirely. Heresy itself is an interesting thing to the Hive because heresy can have a lot of different meanings, and as it turns out, the power of the light does not necessarily stop you from following the sword logic. It is a tool that can be used. It is not to say that you believe in bomb logic to use the light. This is kind of the same idea that has been followed by Savathun's Hive Guardians. They have shown that they still worship the sword logic. They just allow each other to become sharper by letting their ghosts resurrect them so that they can learn in martial combat against each other. This is one of those moments where, yet again, maybe we need to tie apart the light from the Traveler and the darkness from the Veil, or the Witness, or any other entity that might claim control over it, and state that one can indeed be a heretic in some people's eyes, but still follow the sword logic. There's interesting Hive philosophy to look at throughout this entire thing, and all of it really becomes complex if Zevu decides that yes, she will claim the Echo. As far as our other likely contender is concerned, we of course have to talk about Savathun. She is likely to be the other claimant of the Echo, or at least a driving force in the background of the narrative of this episode. She is also quite notably planning for what's coming next already. Savathun's first gambit against us was to claim the powers of the light. This allowed her to detach herself from the losing side of the Witness, and to obtain an even greater form of immortality in the process. It's worth remembering that she is now the most resilient being in all of Destiny, being the only person to have access to both a throne world and a living ghost. With the Echo in her grasp, she might be able to accomplish what she sees as the next step in her plans. And even without any of that, taking the Echo would make her nearly invincible due to the amount of power that she gains. Whether her plans are to ascend to a higher reality, to prepare to survive the next combat against the Winnower, or perhaps to accomplish something greater that we do not yet understand, is a mystery to us. But doubtless, she will be watching, she will be thinking about whether she should claim the Echo, and she will be critical to the future of all stories involving the Hive, particularly those that involve the Hive Pantheon. Even when she isn't directly involved, expect her agents to have parts to play, or expect her to be pulling some strings in the background. At bare minimum, she'll be aware of whatever's going on and will maneuver herself and her minions to take advantage of that situation. In all of these possibilities, there are wildcards as well. We could see characters such as Toland claim the Echo, like I talked about earlier, thus ushering in a new Hive God to the Pantheon in this moment of calamitous change. Toland has long sought that position of the Taken King, and I think that there is a decent possibility that if he somehow managed to find the Echo, that he might be able to embrace that position for himself and take power. Whether that happens or not is yet to be seen. Of course, if we're looking to shake up the Pantheon's existing members, maybe the Echo will be claimed by one of the remaining worm gods. This would upset the dynamic that the Hive have enjoyed for so long. The worm gods are superior to them, but since Oryx killed Akka, they've been much less of a serious threat to the Hive's own machinations. With Savathun having abandoned them, and with Zivur Wrath being weakened, the worm gods might be in this position where claiming light and dark makes sense to them, especially with the death of the Witness. And this would also leave the entire Pantheon in chaos. The Hive would have seen their gods betray them, and yet again, this makes for another moment at which Heresy's prediction of the entire Pantheon being turned on its head come true. And then there is an even bigger question surrounding the Echo. Not just who would claim it, but who's inside the Echo. You see, every Echo contains the remnants of a civilization that was folded into the final shape by the Witness. In the instance of the previous Echoes, we saw that a Kugu commander was folded into Maya's Echo of Command, and an Elixni Elder was folded into Fikrol's Echo of Reese. The Echo of Reese, yes, that was likely to be Chelchis, the Kell of Stone, by the way, but we don't know that it was her for certain. So if this Echo is discovered and there is an entity within it, as there was with the last two, who is that entity going to be? Are they going to be an Echo of Fundament or something? Are they going to be a Hive-adjacent entity? If so, does that make them a survivor of the Ammonite, the first?
Could they be a worm god, perhaps? I'm trying to like spell it out loud, but I don't know. It's a great question. It brings out a great point that each Echo did have something contained within it as well. So within this third one, if there is anything, perhaps it could be a worm god. One of the defeated worm gods in the past.
Species that the Hive put to the torch. Maybe a memory of a helium drinker overlord. Maybe something else. Whatever the case, they must have been folded into the final shape by the Witness. Maybe it is one of the remaining worms that was left behind on Fundament.
See?
Either way, again, the Witness is the key here, and whatever character is within the Echo must have interacted with them. If we are going back to the Dreadnought, it'd be best to know what we're up against. Beyond the basics, the Dreadnought has been floating in Saturn's orbit since Oryx's defeat. The circle it blasted in Saturn's rings is still there, as it hasn't had enough time for the asteroid belt to return to a more normal state and heal that scar. The preview for the episode seemed to imply that we would become sort of the navigators of the Dreadnought. This might imply that we are the ones who'll be pushing to take control of the Hive in some fashion. If not the Hive, then the Dreadnought itself. This matters because the set of armor referenced in this conversation is a Hive armor set that is being called the Navigator armor, and that word Navigator is really the key. This is a reference to Oryx's position as the first Navigator. Oryx, being the Taken King and at one time the most powerful Hive god, made him one who was capable of commanding entire legions, and, of course, he was the one that would adequately chart their course into the deep, towards the final shape. So, if we're going to claim the Navigator armor, are we perhaps making our own pathways into the deep? Speaking of charting our way into the deep, Oryx's throne world is something that will undoubtedly still exist. Perhaps I should clarify. The Dreadnought as its entirety is not Oryx's throne world. The inner reaches are. The Dreadnought is baleful armor that encapsulates the throne world, and the throne world does exist in real space as it has been turned inside out. The Hive still celebrate this if they're keeping to their old holiday of Inversion Day, which they celebrate by turning things inside out. It's worth remembering that within this particular cyst, this throne world that Oryx made, there are potentially staggering items of power that are still around. For example, the Tablets of Ruin can be found in Golgoroth's cellar, which might include the knowledge of the powers to take. Remember that this same knowledge was used by the Witness to literally abduct planets. So ultimately, if you're looking for some kind of super weapon, yeah, you've got one right there, just waiting in the middle of Golgoroth's
Right by where
cellar.
Golgoroth was.
But that's not the only one. The Dreadnought had its own cannon, a weapon that was fired during the Battle of Saturn and which, in a single shot, destroyed the entirety of the Awoken fleet but for a few survivors. Whilst it's been offline for the last decade, as best we know, it could be reactivated in some manner. If it does get reactivated, it'd present a terrible addition to anyone's arsenal if they tried to use it. As a reminder, this weapon doesn't just kill things in proximity to the Dreadnought, it sends out a pulse from Oryx's throne world, enveloping all those in proximity to the Dreadnought in the Taken King's power and taking them. The wave is in itself a massive concussive blast as well, which means that if you're not killed, you are surviving, but only to be taken by Oryx. Ships will be destroyed. Anyone who's left over becomes Oryx's servants as they are folded into his throne world as it is momentarily allowed to fling itself into real space. Imagine that this is a beam that kills you if it doesn't abduct you, and that gives you at least a vague description of the weapon. If Oryx's presence, and the presence of his sword which was used to fire this, is required, then maybe the weapon doesn't operate anymore. But the apparatus for the weapon is still there, and I wouldn't trust the idea that it is completely defunct. The Dreadnought is also home to a series of tactical assets that must be considered beyond this. First of all, we have the Dantalian Exodus 6, a Skyburner Cabal warship that crashed into the hull of the Dreadnought. At worst, this wreck is just a shell filled with more hive, but at best, it might become a functional command post from which we would be able to conduct some operations on the Dreadnought.
I could see that
They
happening
might
all
be
over
performed
again.
with the help of Empress Keitel,
Just becoming
and
like
her
a helm,
agents
if you
who would
will,
know
right
the
here.
ship's systems better than us. The ship is also important because of the path
The new
through
helm.
the Dantalian Exodus 6, which leads us towards the Dreadnought's core. This is a critical tactical objective that we absolutely must secure given what we know about it. Whilst it's unlikely that the Hive would want to damage the core, it's something that we should seek to control and protect. And that's because of what happened, or nearly happened, back in the Taken King. A pair of Cabal Bond brothers took over the core and threatened to detonate it if their Primus wasn't returned to them. As it turned out, the Primus had been taken by Oryx and was then killed by us. There was no returning him at all. But the Vanguard projected that if the Bond brothers did detonate the Dreadnought's core, the resulting shockwave of destroying a paradoxical throne world would destroy half of Sol. Yes, half the solar system.
Holy cow.
So, yeah, we do need to keep that out of the hands of bad actors, because
Absolutely.
otherwise they happen to have the biggest improvised explosive in history within their grasp. The Dreadnought is wild in that way. There's just a lot of stuff in there that is unbelievably powerful, and we're not even getting to the residents of the Dreadnought yet. These residents might at least be a little bit less organized than they were 10 years ago. When Osiris visited the Dreadnought, he tapped into the Hive's intelligence networks and perceived that the Dreadnought was filled with chaos. This chaos might have given room for even greater foes to arise, though, and that's because Oryx's Dreadnought also had something containing powerful foes, a prison facility, namely the Hanging Crypts. It's within these crypts that Oryx imprisoned some of the most powerful Hive that ever tried to rise against him, including Alakul, who at the time was known as the Dark Blade.
The Dark Blade.
Alakul raised an entire brood worth of Hive in order to try and take Oryx's place. He failed and was imprisoned here until he was eventually killed by us. The thing about the entirety of this Hive prison facility, though, is that it's massive. It is cavernous, and the Darkblade was just one resident of this prison. The silent brood that resides within it, be they either prisoner or guard, may be in chaos, but if there is a powerful individual that lies at the heart of all of this, they might be able to rise from the crypts and take advantage of the chaos left by a power vacuum. And this is to say nothing of what lies deep near the heart of the vessel, the Court of Oryx.
The Court
If you're
of
looking for
Oryx.
powerful Hive, this is another place to find them. This is the High War, where Ascendant Hive of old would come to learn at the foot of Oryx's teachings. It is where the greatest generals did battle against each other to sharpen themselves, and where Oryx's Ascendants rose to bring their tribute to their god. If any of those powerful Hive are still about, that might be something we need to contest as well, if only to stop them from uniting with their brethren throughout the system. Also remember that one of those Ascendants was Balwer, one of the daughters of Savathun. She never had a huge degree of narrative relevance, but with Savathun now actually being a major story character, it might be a change that Bungie could follow. Speaking of Savathun, it's likely that she has resurrected some assets within the Dreadnought and is running a kind of tactical ground war for control of it. I say this because some of Oryx's old brood turned up in the Ghosts of the Deep dungeon, in particular Oryx's right hand, the Sword of Oryx, known as Ekthar. He was resurrected as a Hive Lightbearer and turned into the Shield of Savathun, a Hive Lightbearer knight who we fought and killed in the process. They were leading an operation to find Oryx's corpse and resurrect it using a combination of necromancy and a Hive ghost. If they had turned Oryx into a Hive Guardian, who knows what would have happened. But regardless, Savathun had to find Ekthar and the other members of Oryx's brood somewhere, and it appears that they would have found that brood down within the Dreadnought. So it's likely that Savathun's ghosts have been here, and that as a result, a foothold might have been established by the Lucent brood. If that is what's going on, then we might see Hive battling other Hive, a novelty that we've not actually witnessed at all.
No, that would be
Even
crazy.
in the Season of the Witch, when we saw various forces under Xivu Arath's command making their way through, we never actually saw the Lucent brood fighting a different brood of Hive. So who knows what happens here? I would gather that if that has happened, Xivu Arath's brood might be on the back foot, given that Hive Guardians represent a unique tactical advantage that Savathun would be able to leverage. And then, amongst all of the chaos, amongst all of the various powerful Hive, amongst all of the terrible things on the Dreadnought that we need to take into account, there is a further, stranger part to the Dreadnought still, which is that in Heresy it looks as though the Dreadnought is somehow changing. Parts of it, and parts of the heretical arsenal weapons, can be seen in concept art.
What he means by the Dreadnought changing is it's turning almost into a skeletal form. Its inner parts are being exposed. It is under the influence of something, and it has been revealed that the Echo has landed on the Dreadnought, perhaps creating this effect, but we shall see.
And these parts are peeling away, with the flesh of the ship being removed to reveal what can only be described as a skeletal structure beneath it. This is completely new to the Dreadnought, which may have always been a bit, well, frankly musky and dead, but has never been skeletal like this before. And if this is something that's happening, we don't know why it's happening. So maybe that's something that we'll see revealed in the Heresy stream, but for the moment, it looks as though the Dreadnought itself is undergoing a vast and rapid change. Whatever's responsible for this is likely to also be the one in control of the Echo, although that's not a guarantee. And I think it's worth pointing out again at this moment that the Dreadnought itself is something to remember and consider, and the reason for that is simple. It is what remains of Akka, the Worm of Secrets. This thing is armored in the remains of a Hive worm god. And if Heresy for the Hive is the resurrection of dead things, well, you can start to see where this is going. I don't know if that's how this would even function, but if someone is in control of the Echo and is trying to resurrect a dead worm god that is a part of the Dreadnought, well, there's a terrible chimeric thing going on there.
Whoa.
And we should probably stop it.
Absolutely.
In all this chaos, it at least seems like we're probably going to have some familiar faces joining us along the way. Eris Morn will once again be central to this season as her eternal battle against the Hive evolves once more. Expect her to be our guide, as she is with all things concerning the Hive. However, expect her to also have a newfound degree of confidence. Ever since she dealt a mortal blow to Xivu Arath and even struck a killing blow against Savathun, she is now one who has a vast degree of experience actually killing hive gods for herself, not just commanding armies against them. Regardless, she also knows Hive Apocrypha better than anyone, and one of the armor sets for this episode is an armor set that implies you are one of Eris's chosen champions. She will be central to this, make no mistake. She might be accompanied by those who have somewhat less experience dealing with the Hive, but still experienced nonetheless. In this regard, there are a few characters that I think we will potentially see. First of all, Ikora Rey, who was instrumental in the campaign against Savathun in the Witch Queen, and who is the commander of the hidden agents of the city, of which Eris Morn is one. We might also see another close confidant of Eris Morn, Mara Sov, who has had to contest the Hive in the Dreaming City for many years, and who has also had to face Savathun in her own time. It's possible that Deputy Commander Sloane might also lend a hand here, especially if Xivu Arath is involved and is looking for a rematch. Empress Keitel's continual feud against the Hive might also demand her presence in this episode. After all, the Hive took Toro Bartel under Xivu Arath's command, and with a little bit of an assist from Savathun. Any way in which she can wound the Hive is a plus. There are also some Hive ghosts that might be involved in the story. Imaru would certainly follow Savathun wherever she went.
Imaru is Savathun's ghost.
And he wouldn't necessarily be looking to help us. Finch, on the other hand, knows the inner workings of the Lucent Hive, and is indeed someone who we might be able to rely on and trust.
Oh, Finchy. Yeah, I could see him coming back and playing a role in Heresy, absolutely. Plus, he owes me a few thousand K glimmer.
He proved himself during the Witch Queen campaign, and is still our conspiratorial contact within the throne world. And finally, wherever Eris Morn goes, the Drifter is likely to follow. Eris and the Drifter, or Germain or Wu Ming, whatever name he's running by at the time, have been on the verge of a romantic relationship for quite some time. The Drifter's latest quests, where he's asking us to ferry bento boxes to Eris, are just the latest evolution of that relationship.
That's right.
It's one where they see each other with mutual respect. They've both survived their own hells, their own apocalypses, and have been changed for it.
Respect.
And despite the darkness that surrounded them in both their tales, they were able to see some commonality. They are both members of the so-called Dark Vanguard, alongside Elsie Bray, aka the Exo Stranger, and both of them have learned to see the hope and light of everything that is around them even in this calamitous time. They made it through disaster, and are here for each other. I think if Eris is having any kind of narrative evolution, as she did in Season of the Witch, the Drifter will be there, and he will be one to support her and be in her corner for the most part. Of course, there are other characters, be they completely new to the franchise or as of yet unheard of, that could also make an appearance. At the top of that list for me, I think, would be Luzaku, a hive wizard who now takes up residence within the Blooming, a lost sector within the Pale Heart of the Traveler, although whether she would leave that place is unknown. Of course, there could be further characters that have received limited or perhaps no voice acting at all within Destiny.
Toland.
I'm thinking, of course, about Toland, but also there is that odd possibility wherever the Hive stories go where you could throw Teox into the mix and it would be possible, even if it is a long shot. That maybe is a little bit less possible, understanding that Teox might actually be the legendary Oxa machine, but who knows? If Scions are involved, I think Oxa is much more possible, but I'm not holding out hope for any of that. I don't think it's likely. For now, we need to wait on the developer livestream that we're going to see on Tuesday to see more details about the episode. Revenant didn't really have much to excite me about story things. There are some bits and pieces that I definitely do like about it, but it's also one of those moments where I can't blame anyone for taking a bit of a break. I also took the time to do a massive project on Dragon Age at the time being, so yeah, after I burned out on that, I did not cover the episode much. There are some things I've missed, there are some videos I still want to do before all is said and done. Hopefully I still have time for that. I do think, however, that Heresy is going to be different. I certainly hope it is. Hive content has always been one of my favorite kinds of Destiny content, and if Heresy is delivering just more of that, then that'll be a nice high note for me. Does that change the needle for everyone else? No, probably not. But it really does depend. I think if you're excited for this story, I can't blame you, but that's purely on the basis of it's a Hive story, and they're talking about shaking up the entire Pantheon. Whether this brings people back generally is a question for a different video that I do want to make next week, after we have seen the Heresy reveal stream. But that's all from me for now. Thank you so much for watching, as per usual.
Please stay tuned,
if you
everyone.
Want to go ahead and leave a like,
plenty more to go over.
So
please stay
to show
tuned.
your appreciation for the content.
And thank you for
and if you
being
have
here.
any thoughts of your own, go ahead and hit me up in the comments section. If you want more content from universes near and far, remember to hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, has been quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Rodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside. Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. So, the Heresy reveal stream has just finished. I have a few notes in front of me. This is an off-script video, but I wanted to talk about some of the narrative things that we saw within this reveal stream. And yeah, there's some interesting stuff in here, particularly when it pertains to the Hive generally. But also, of course, we have more revealed details on what we'll actually be doing this season, the major characters involved, and the ever so persistent question of will the Dreadnought see the return of Oryx? And little spoiler alert for all of you, in some sense, yes, he will return. But first, let's talk about that time of year again. Hear me out, there's a reason, but the two Abians you can on have done 5, and I mean if you, for me, one of what I want time using factoring. Let's talk about the bits and pieces that we learned from this reveal stream. If I didn't make it clear already with the little spoiler warning before probably the biggest spoiler of the entire stream, yeah, spoilers throughout, so leave if you're not interested in any
Spoiler
of this being
alert,
spoiled
spoiler
for
alert.
you. Why are you on YouTube at this point? You know the routine. We've been doing this for a decade. Get out of here. Anyway, so first detail first. We of course saw that at the very end of Final Shape, 3 echoes were released from the
1,
Traveler.
2,
the first one ended up with Myos and
3.
Daresh, the second one ended up with Fikrul, which is now in the hands of Aramis, and the final, 3rd echo, slammed into the Dreadnought apparently, and was pursued by one of the Dread. The really interesting thing about all of that is that may well be the emphasis and the reason for changes within the Dreadnought. And if that is what's happening here, maybe that explains what's going on, because the other big detail which we saw within one of the major reveals of art for the entirety of Heresy is that in some shape or form, Oryx's spirit has risen again. The way they described it in the stream was that his spirit had been, quote, dredged from the bones of the Dreadnought. We of course also encountered Oryx's body way back when in Ghosts of the Deep. We saw it at the very bottom of the seafloor on Titan.
Yes.
However, spirit and body are two different things. And I think that there's a very interesting possibility here that I just want to go ahead and bring up, which is simply this. You
Also,
remember
let's go
way
back one
that I
frame
just wanna
here.
go ahead-
Take a look, guys. Look at what you see up here. 3 eyes and the head figure. Very, very evident that this is a depiction of Oryx. In a spiritual sense, of course, not in the physical embodiment.
Ahead and bring up, which is simply this. You remember way back in the Books of Sorrow? Maybe you don't remember this if you're not a lore nerd, but there is a point at which Oryx killed his 2 siblings, Zivu-Arath and Savathun, in order to take their power.
Yes, he did. He killed his sisters, Zivu-Arath and Savathun, to take their power, and then resurrected them.
He then resurrected them. with the power of the embodiment of cunning, which resurrected Savathun, and by embodying war, which resurrected Zivur Arath. So what's dredged up Oryx's spirit? Don't know, but if we're supposed to be the ones taking on the role of the navigator, and if we're going on and trying to face off against these various Taken, Hive, and Dread that are being led by a subjugator, maybe it's the case that we are seeing them attempting to resurrect Oryx properly, and they've partially succeeded. Hence the name of the episode, Heresy, because they're using the Echo to do this, and not just the embodiment of navigation as would be done in some other fashion. That's just a guess, that's just me talking off the cuff with this, but who knows? At this exact moment in time, the reason why it's called Heresy isn't perfectly explained, but there are definitely signs towards it. So, we'll see what's going on. The other thing that I think is important to see from the reveal art, well, there's two things actually. First of all, you can see what is probably the major antagonist of the episode, which is our subjugator over on the right-hand side of this art. Of course, you can also see the Echo, which is prominently slammed into what I believe was the old Dread, the Echo.
So let's take that in one more time.
Let's take this in one more time. Reveal art. Well, there's two things actually. First of all, you can see what is probably the major antagonist of the episode, which is our subjugator over on the right-hand side of this art. Of course, you can also see the Echo, which is prominently slammed into what I believe was the old Dreadnought's weapon, as well as the area where you reached the Altar of Oryx. So, if we're going to return to that old epicenter of power, that wouldn't surprise me. Maybe that isn't the Echo, maybe it's just a remnant of everything, I'm not sure. The other really important detail to mention, though, is just... I mean, the Dreadnought is kind of alive and kind of not. It's very much still as dead as Oryx was, but also there are bits and pieces to it that have returned. The old armor of the Dreadnought is peeling away to reveal bone and chitin and flesh underneath. And also, it's covered in tentacles. Like, really big tentacles. Like, these things are the size of tomb ships. They are massive, and they are sprawling throughout the entire system and structure. And I'm going to be completely honest, I don't know what the hell these things are. I don't think I understand where these would have come from. Now, is it possible that this is related to the Dreadnought being forged partially from the baleful armor and hide of Akka? Well, maybe, I don't know. Perhaps the resurrective effect that has brought Oryx back is also starting to affect the Dreadnought generally. So we have a worm god that's kind of being resurrected in all this? I don't know. We'll have to see about all of that, but it's so prominently featured throughout all of the art and throughout all of the new delve into the nether kind of activity that it's kind of impossible to not notice it. Speaking of which, there's more on that narrative, but I think it comes back a little bit later. Controlling the power of the Taken is going to be a really big theme on this, which of course was knowledge that Oryx actually learned from Akka, the Worm of Secrets, the same worm god who now armors his Dreadnought, or whose remains were used to armor it. And Oryx recorded those secrets on what are known as the Tablets of Ruin, these ancient hive artifacts which he then used in order to, quote, go into the deep. As best we can tell, this was used in order to make contact with a primordial entity from way beyond what we have seen thus far in the game. I'm pretty certain, based on the way that language is used within each of the lore tabs and with the way that the original Books of Sorrow was written, that this is not Oryx using the Tablets of Ruin to contact the Witness, but instead is using the Tablets of Ruin to travel into the deep, into a dimension of darkness, where he was contacted by something else.
Perhaps
the likely guess is that this was the Winnower, and it just so happens that one of the Tablets of Ruin is an artifact this season.
That's right, guys. The artifact coming in episode Heresy will be the Tablet of Ruin, as you can see here. That is a huge, huge thing.
Seasonal artifact, you know, where you get all your perks. So yeah, that's concerning and alarming, and it maybe hints at what the rest of the entire episode is all about. Because it turns out that we may well be using the artifacts in a manner that Oryx used them, to control the power of the Taken. In fact, That is the stated goal of some of our allies and what they'll be leading us along. Speaking of which, Eris Morn, the Drifter, and Deputy Commander Sloane will all have a role in this story. Eris and Drifter are fairly self-explanatory, but Sloane's role, for those of you who weren't around during the Season of the Deep, is not well known. Sloane stayed behind on Titan way back in the Season of Arrivals, and she returned in the Season of the Deep. She was corrupted by Taken infestation from Zivor Arath, and in the process of all of that, it meant that she was able to tap into the Taken's communications and those who were giving them greater orders. Her resolve is something that needs to be stated with all of this, because essentially she kept the Hive God of War at bay for years, just on her own with no one but her ghost and Arsa, the great Leviathan of Titan. And ultimately, that means that she has unbelievable mental fortitude and she's been able to resist being taken. That is something pretty unique across, well, a lot of the universe. Unique. I think the only other person who has been able, in a catalogued and proper sense, to actually resist the pull of being taken, where it just dissolves your entire personality and turns you into a husk, where you only obey the will of the one who took you, yeah, the only other person is Mara Sov. So you're looking at some pretty powerful resolve here. Sloane is apparently going to be teaching us the ways of resolve, and is going to be teaching us to manifest the power of the Taken and old Hive magics, which we will then be able to weave into our paracausal abilities, be they light or darkness. This is something we will be using in order to fight against our new enemies within this episode. So, we have a pretty alarming set of circumstances, and I think it is worth really briefly touching on that point, because if the entire point of the dread here is in order to recover the Tablets of Ruin, find the way of speaking into the deep and to that darkness, there is a reason for all of that. If they are trying to get back to it, I think it's because what the Witness originally saw within the Veil informed it on creating the final shape, and gave it the inspiration for its entire goal. The Dread were manifestations of the Witness's will, but also they were twisted individuals who were created in order to serve it. And with the Witness being dead, they've been searching and seeking these echoes for a long time. It's probably the case that, having discovered that one of them slammed into the Dreadnought, they may also be looking for that secret of how to take, and that matters a whole lot, purely on the basis that if they can contact what the Witness contacted, when it originally created itself and looked into the Veil, they may well be able to greet themselves alongside a power that is far greater than anything we've ever seen. I think if there are big story implications going forward, at least I would hope that is part of the direction where things are being taken, because the Winnower storyline and plotline is really not something that's being talked about a whole lot within Destiny outside of a few lore tabs. And it is, realistically, the future of the entire franchise. If this Dread has taken control of the Echo and is looking to use it and the old knowledge of how to take in order to build up some kind of greater force so that it can project power and become essentially the new stand-in for the Witness.
So this activity looks just like when we went through the coil back a few seasons ago. If you guys take a look here, you would approach these objects at certain checkpoints, each one having its own form of a buff or some kind of strengthening towards your character, and you choose one and you move on. So yeah, this is going to be coming back. Also, if you don't already know, along the way on this adventure, along the way on this particular activity, any healing is limited. So this is a shout out to all the warlocks out there that can have some healing pretty much on demand whenever their ability is up. Yeah, there will only be certain times when healing will be presented to you, but you will have increased health to make up for that. But yeah, it's going to be challenging. You're going to have to be very careful out there.
Knowledge of how to take in order to build up some kind of greater force so that it can project power and become essentially the new stand-in for the Witness, then we need to worry, because it's standing in for the Witness as the arm of a power that is even greater. So yeah, that's our hope for the future narrative. All that being said, this is an episode.
So yeah, as you can see here, each boon does have an upside and a downside, so it does grant a buff. However, there is a corruption side to it. In particular, this Paracausal Siphon here, its buff increases your elemental damage that you're dealing against enemies, and the corruption is where it drains your grenade and class abilities. So this is going to be a very unique take. And also, by the way, damn, look at all the silver on this account. Holy crap, bro.
But I don't know exactly how all of this is going to go. One thing I have seen from the reveal stream is that apparently they're looking to recodify the way that they do stories. They have new tech for when displaying holo projector conversations. They're also refocusing on the way that we interact with the story and narrative. There will occasionally still be moments where we return to a vendor somewhere on the Dreadnought, but, well, actually I don't know if it's somewhere on the Dreadnought, that's not been confirmed yet, but there are attempts now to try and make it so that the narrative of the game is going to be told in a different manner, and so that it's not just a whole long series of radio conversations and text dialogue pop-ups. Again, they've taken a few stabs at this. We'll see if this is any better. Hopefully it is. I don't know what's going on with it, so we'll have to wait and see. Either way, look for more Heresy details on the channel in the coming weeks. There will definitely be more stuff coming along with all of that when it actually releases, which is this time next week practically, or, well, Tuesday reset, you know the time if you're a Destiny player. Also, keep in mind, there were new Sundered Doctrine details, and really quickly I want to go over that because there isn't much, but there is enough to give us at least a little extra hint at things. If you take a look at the Sundered Doctrine portion where they talk about the raid race, or rather the dungeon race for this, you will see that they show the actual pin that you get for the title, and the pin itself displays a worm prominently on it, a worm larva in particular,
Right
not
there.
a massive worm god, and it looks like it's at the center of the upended. That's just a guess, but the worm larva is definite, and that means that worms are probably going to be at the core of all this.
There's almost certainly a connection there, and he's dead on. You've got a worm right here, and the appendage shape is exactly that form right there in respect to its drawings, its illustrations when we actually did the raid. Yeah, that's incredible right there that we've already got this connection prior to taking down this activity. This is incredible. Great insight right here into the future.
As part of the narrative focus, or as a mechanic that are being used. That's the way I interpret this, at least. As for the upended being at the center of this, if that's what the worm is really backed behind, then yeah, that makes a certain degree of sense as well. It is possibly one of the most powerful artifacts that you've found within the entirety of the pyramid, so it makes sense that someone would be returning to this place in order to try and claim it. What this has to do with the worms, I don't know, but Rulk was also well known for experimenting with the worms. You know the Caretaker? Yeah, that's the fruit of all his labor. It's the combination of a scorn with hive worm power, and ultimately it was able to feed its worm and build and grow its power to a substantial extent. We did destroy it as well, but it's not impossible that other experiments, like the many of those that have been calcified in ice or glass or whatever it may be, that are just strewn about the deck of the pyramid, yeah, maybe those are something that needs to be taken care of, because there's a lot of them. There are an awful large amount of them. In the room where you enter, you can see dozens, if not hundreds of worms that are just left in cold storage. So, yeah, we'll figure that out as time goes on. And of course, as I've mentioned earlier, where worms are involved, there is also the corpse of the worm mother Zeta at the center of all this. Who knows?
Zeta being this right here, this worm god, and this is the upended.
Who knows if she is actually going to be involved in this? Who knows if she's the boss? Maybe she's relevant to the narrative, but either way, I think that's relatively important. If you want to see me discuss more of this, by the way, you can go ahead and check out Dungeon Zone's pre-show. Remember that if you are tuning in for the dungeon race, it's going to be something you can see over on Evan and CB Gray's stream. That's something you can catch on Twitch, and it'll be displaying throughout the entirety of the day. Bungie will be pushing it. I will be there in the pre-show as well to give a brief little talk about lore and answer some questions, and to see what might be happening. I may be on later in the stream. We've not discussed anything about that, but that's purely on the basis of if there is something utterly massive, maybe they call on me. Who knows? Either way, I'm going to be on call for that, and I'll be looking forward to doing Sundered Doctrine myself at some point, and bringing you all a big, deep lore breakdown, just like I did for Vesper's host. Anyway, That's all from me for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, and if you're looking forward to doing anything in Heresy, go ahead and leave a like, and also remember to go ahead and leave your own thoughts down below in the comments section. And if you want more content from worlds near and far, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe
Please
to
stay
turn
tuned,
on those
everyone.
email
We still have some more
notifications.
content to go.
But as per
Please stay
usual,
tuned.
know that your
And thank
viewership,
you
as
for being
always,
here.
is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Rodacia Arastra. I'll see you, Starside.
Again, guys, we've got some more content. Please stay tuned, and thank you for being here.
Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. Heresy is coming up, and before we get into things properly, I wanted to just talk a little speculation with you all. In the latest reveal stream from Bungie, we got to take a look at a lot of what we'll see in Heresy. Bungie, I think, has deliberately kept quite a lot of story details close to their chest, and we got quite a few big pieces of information anyway. What we did learn was pretty substantial. All in itself, though, I wanted to focus on a single detail today. Namely, the seasonal artifact. This time, our seasonal artifact is a Tablet of Ruin. I touched on this briefly after my stream recap, but I wanted to talk more about it here and with a little bit more detail, because I think this leads us to possibly some of the most critical post-witness pieces of storytelling that we're going to interact with in Heresy. The Tablets of Ruin are many things, but chief amongst all of them, I think they are potentially a gateway into the future of Destiny's narrative and its next great villain. For those of you who've been tuned into the lore, you know that it is no hive god. You know exactly who I'm talking about. So, let's start from the very beginning. What are the Tablets of Ruin? Simply put, they're objects that are inscribed with knowledge. It's the nature of that knowledge that really changes everything. Our story really begins all the way back in the Books of Sorrow, the eras of the Hive when they were sieging across the galaxy. And the Hive were indeed laying siege to the Empire of the Ecumene. This was the first war in which they were actually losing, thanks to the intervention of Teox on the Ecumene's side. The Great Hive gods, Xivu Arath, Savathun, and Alrix assembled in Alrix's throne world, and a solution was devised.
Alrix is the precursor name to Oryx, in case anyone is new to that, so don't let that confuse you. It is the name that Oryx had before he became Oryx, and before he, took over and had his power.
Alrix would kill his two sisters, and would claim their power through such an action, as was the way of the sword logic. He would then use their combined power to face Akka, the Worm of Secrets. And after killing Akka, he would extract what he was really after, the secret of communing with the Deep. This is the knowledge that he would inscribe on the Tablets of Ruin, the secret from Akka's corpse.
And we're essentially getting a Tablet of Ruin as our artifact. So just think about that. Just think about how powerful that is, how cool and unique that is. It's going to be really incredible.
Alrix would then use this knowledge to enter the Deep. The words spoken there are not known, but when Alrix returned, he would not only become Oryx the Taken King, he had also learned the power to take. Thanks to the Witch Queen campaign and the mission where we recovered one of the Tablets of Ruin from the Light Blade, we now know...
If you recall, here it is right here. This is the tablet right here. When we defeated the Light Blade. Right here, guys. I'm sure you remember beating this fucking guy right here. And how hard that was initially before, our builds became what they were. But yeah, there is a Tablet of Ruin right here.
Know that this power is not simply the ability to turn something into a Taken. It's more nuanced and broader than that. It is the power to move something into another dimension. More often than not, when the Taken are concerned, This is a dimension fueled with darkness. Functionally, though, this is how the Taken are made. They are sent into this other place through the power of teleportation, ripped through a wound in reality, and when they are sent back, they are hollow. Eris would not describe them as shadows, but instead an antithesis of what they were. Sharper, deadlier. This is how this moment, this great triumph, is remembered within the books of sorrow. Ulrix, the first navigator, set upon his god with his sword and his words, and cut Akka to pieces, and took from those pieces the secret of calling upon the deep. He wrote this secret on a set of tablets, which he called the Tablets of Ruin, and he wore them about his waist. Then Ulrich said, "Now I may speak to the deep, the beautiful, final shape. I will be king of shapes. I will learn all the secrets of our destiny." His speech to the deep is not recorded here, but it is known that he returned and he said, "Now I am Oryx, the Taken King, and I have the power to take life and make it my own." Then he went out into the universe and fought the Ecumene with his tablets, and the worm, his god, was pleased. This is why the Tablets of Ruin are so important. They are the secret to the power that made Oryx sovereign over all the Hive, but the origins of that power are far darker than anything we've ever encountered, even darker perhaps than the Witness. They were so important that as time went on, Savathun and Xivu-Arath both made concerted efforts to steal the tablets from Oryx, and in response the Taken King would cripple their own tribute in such a way that they would never be able to oppose him ever again. In the wake of Oryx's death, the Tablets of Ruin were not properly catalogued and contained. The city was not able to account for all of them. This may have been a clear tactical error on our part, though we can't say for sure what measures the Hidden might have taken to keep an eye on these artifacts, or if they could have been recovered at all. Regardless of what did or didn't happen, at least one of the Tablets of Ruin managed to slip the net, and ended up in Savathun's throne world. It was guarded by the rival Oryx had imprisoned long ago, Alak-Hul, the former Darkblade, now risen again in the light. Whether we actually continued to maintain control over this Tablet of Ruin is unknown, but there is another that we also know the location of, the one in the center of Golgoroth's cellar.
That's right, guys. Here it is, right next to Golgoroth. We could access this very easily aboard the Dreadnought.
Where it appears as a far larger pillar, the center of the room behind where Oryx's massive beast resides. It now appears that we will be able to acquire one of these tablets for ourselves as the seasonal artifact in Heresy. But us receiving this artifact is probably no coincidence. There has to be a reason for us claiming it specifically, and I think it's tied to the events of Heresy, the possibilities of what it might entail, and in particular, to Deputy Commander Sloane. For those of you who don't know, Sloane's long period of isolation on Titan resulted in her having a close encounter with the forces of Xivu-Arath, including the War God herself. She was afflicted with Taken corruption and saw half her body become overwhelmed with the dark powers of the Taken. For years, she was able to harness her resolve to repel Xivu-Arath's influence, preventing the War God from consuming her completely. This was something which she did almost completely alone. Only her ghost and Asa, the great worm Leviathan of Titan, were there to keep her company. In the process of becoming Taken, though, she was able to learn a great deal about the secrets of the Hive and the Taken. She was able to listen in on the orders of those that commanded the Taken, including Xivu-Arath. This granted her a unique degree of insight into the tactics and movements of the enemy, but also into their very being and the nature of who they are and the power that they wield. In Heresy, it appears that Sloane is going to be teaching us more about this, as she will be leading us on what is being referred to as the Path of Resolve, a means by which we can control and use the powers of the Hive's magics and the secrets of the Taken. I think this Path of Resolve and the Tablets of Ruin are linked. In particular, I think that Sloane is going to be teaching us to use the powers of the Tablet of Ruin alongside Eris, so that we can take control of the power of the Taken before our new Subjugator enemy does. But I also think it is worth noting that it's not just about the idea of, oh, this Subjugator could potentially take new enemies and create an army for itself. It is a far bigger deal. The ability to take, as I have stated, is not just about taking your enemies and turning them into your own army. It is about what happens when you go into the beyond. It is about contacting what lies there. This, I think, is the key to our fight. Where that power leads us is all the more important. The abilities Oryx learned from the Tablets of Ruin, yes, they did give him vast strength, but the strength was more important because of what he connected to. And to cut the chase short, yes, it's possible that that was the winnower. That's something which is recounted in my favorite story in all of Destiny, told within the Books of Sorrow, the chapters where Oryx makes this communion. Some of the entries that I'm going to read to you now. For the context around this as it starts in the story, Oryx and the Hive have just seen Oryx's ascension and the defeat of the Ecumene. Xivu Arath and Savathun were brought back by trickery and war, and they have now set siege to a new world. As Oryx put it, he proclaimed that the Hive had conquered their way to the edge of the deep. Wrath. Behold the wrath of Oryx, coiled for 10,000 years. Behold the golden amputation, the fall of Taisha-Beth, the end of an age. We beat the worlds of Taisha-Beth like skull drums, and we howl in joy for our black war moons as they ram silver orbitals and gleaming star webs, where infant Taisha-Bethi sun ravens curl and die unborn. In his throne world, Oryx paces 10 times. On the first pace, Kragor sends the Accursed to blight the Taisha-Bethi worlds. On the second pace, the Tai unleash their battle plates and arsenal ships to fight our moons. On the third pace, Oryx's war priest meets them in battle, and he is victorious. He paints the void with fire, he salts the earth with ash. On the fourth pace, Mengur and Kradug, Dyad Knights, go to the Raven Bridge, and they stand on it and kill the Tai for 10 years. On the fifth pace, the Tai Emperor Raven comes home to her bridge, and she cuts a moon with her talons. She cuts it open and kills its brood. On the sixth pace, Oryx speaks, saying, "Listen to me, Emperor Raven, and I will describe to you the last true shape, which is written on my tablet." And he puts out his fist full of black fire, and he swallows up the Emperor Raven with a wound. Ayat, only Oryx knows this power, the power to take. On the seventh pace, the perfect Raven comes out of Oryx's wound, and she spreads her wings across Taisha-Beth. Never again is a Taisha-Bethi child born. She is perfect. She enacts the will of Oryx. On the eighth pace, the Tai say, "Listen, you are spoilers, you are sphincters and etc. You rot. Why do you kill? We made silver orbitals and golden star webs. We hatched eggs. We had a good thing. Our clothes were nice. Our food was famous. With one of her feathers, our emperor could have tickled the gods." On the ninth pace, Oryx says, "This is the only god. The ability to dictate what will and will not exist. This power to go on existing. This is your god. It is never ticklish." On the 10th pace, the Taisha-Bethi are extinct. Then Oryx says, "Listen, my siblings. Do you know what we have done? We have conquered our way to the edge of the deep. It whispers to me when I call on it, and it guides my flight. It says that we are at its threshold, and that I should come inside. I will go and speak to it. Oryx went down into his throne world. He went out into the abyss, and with each step, he read one of his tablets so that they became like stones beneath his feet. He went out and he created an altar, and he prepared an unborn ogre. He called on the deep, saying, I can see you in the sky. You are the waves which are battles, and the battles are the waves. Come into this vessel I have prepared for you.
That's
And
Golgoroth.
it arrived. The deep itself. Oryx, my king, my friend, kick back, relax. Shrug off that armor, set down that blade, roll your burdened shoulders and let down your guard. This is a place of life, a place of peace. Out in the world we ask a simple, true question. A question like, can I kill you? Can I rip your world apart? Tell me the truth, for if I don't ask, someone will ask it of me. And they call us evil. Evil. Evil means socially maladaptive. We are adaptiveness itself. Ah, Oryx, how do we explain it to them? The world is not built on the laws they love, not on friendship, but on mutual interest. Not on peace, but on victory by any means. The universe is run by extinction, by extermination, by gamma ray bursts burning up 1,000 garden worlds, by howling singularities eating up infant suns. And if life is to live, if anything is to survive through the end of all things, it will not live by the smile, but by the sword. Not in a soft place, but in a hard hell. Not in the rotting bog of artificial paradise, but in the cold, hard, self-verifying truth of that one ultimate arbiter, the only judge. The power that is its own metric and its own source. Existence at any cost. Strip away the lies and truces and delaying tactics they call civilization, and this is what remains, this beautiful shape. The fate of everything is made like this, in the collision, the test of one praxis against another. This is how the world changes. One way meets a second way, and they discharge their weapons. They exchange their words and markets. They contest, and in doing so, they petition each other for the right to go on being something instead of nothing. This is the universe figuring out what it should be in the end. And it is majestic. Majestic. It is the only thing that can be true in and of itself. And it is what I am.
My guess there is that is the winnower speaking. All of that was the winnower.
The voice spoken there continued to show Oryx things, lessons, painful lessons. Lessons that brought him to a new realization of self-reliance. And it was from these lessons that he knew he should expand his tribute. It was from these lessons that Crota, Uranuk, Urhalak, and Nokris were born. I've gone on about this passage before, but for those of you who are unacquainted, let's break it down. The deep is a hive colloquialism that often references darkness generally. It is an idea that references a power, a being, and a place all at once. This means that when the deep itself arrived, there was something that appeared before Oryx that was an incarnation of darkness itself. And yet, it was also found within the place where darkness resides. True darkness. We also know that thanks to the narration provided, when the witness speaks, it refers to itself as we, but the entity that spoke to Oryx in majestic, the one that he referred to as waves of battle, and the battle made waves, it refers to itself with a singular pronoun. It is not the witness. It is different. It is something more. This is the principal reason why I believe it to be the Winnower, but also because those lines, majestic, majestic, have been repeated elsewhere in Destiny. There are cavalcades of pieces of examination of these bits of writing, and I think it is pretty much determined by most of the lore creators on YouTube, if not the wider lore community, that the Winnower does exist, and likely is what Oryx spoke to. But there is more to this, and this is where the Tablets of Ruin come into all of it, because if you remember, in that middle section, they are actually part of the key as to how Oryx is able to do this. They are part of the secret that Akka kept, and which Oryx carved onto those tablets. When Oryx went down into his throne world to commune with the deep itself, he read from each of his tablets, and he was able to walk out into the abyss. And the tablets there became like stones beneath his feet. All this implies that thanks to the power of the tablets and his power to take, he was able to find stable ground to stand on in that place. He was able to find purchase in a dimension that otherwise would have either consumed or repelled him. It sounds to me as though the power of the tablets allowed him to transport himself into the dimension of darkness in the first place without being destroyed. When Oryx spoke to that being, it is likely that not only did he speak to the Winnower, but also he was speaking to and pledging himself to what gave him the power over the Taken. Here's the thing though, as the Light and Dark saga officially closes out with Heresy and a new saga for Destiny begins, the villains of old have officially fallen. A new villain is likely to rise in their place, and so our tale here revolves potentially around what happens next. I think that between the Echo and the Tablets of Ruin, there is a chance to gain the power necessary to use the great power of taking. But this is not simply about creating Taken. This is about the power to walk out into the abyss and to contact the deep itself.
Wow.
This is why I hazard to say that the Tablet of Ruin is one of the most important seasonal artifacts that we've ever received in Destiny's history, and also one of the most important artifacts in the entirety of Sol. I think it's easily up there with artifacts like the Seed of Silver Wings, or the Fang of Zivua Wrath, or the staff that was used to denote us as one of Eris's acolytes. But as a relic, the sheer scale of history with which the Tablets of Ruin are associated is vast beyond comparison for most of these other objects, maybe with only the Seed of Silver Wings measuring up. And it's crucial for what's happening next. What's more, I think that Sloane's connection to the Taken is going to be key to understanding how the tablet operates and how it can be used to control the Taken or to commune with what lies beyond. But our own purposes for the tablet might be secondary. Our prime purpose should simply be possessing and protecting it from others. This is where I think the real part of the story of the Dreadnought and the tablet comes in. I think that our enemies are invading the Dreadnought for a specific reason. They are led by one of the Dread's subjugators, and I think that that Dread subjugator may well be trying to enact a communion of their own. When Oryx communed with the Deep itself, he became one of the most powerful beings in existence, perhaps surpassed only by his sister Savathun when she took the light, the first subjugator and first disciple Rulk, and the Witness itself. And the Witness, well, it was a compound being created when the people of the Precursor Penitent looked into the Veil, and perhaps beheld the same thing as Oryx. In both instances, terrible dark champions were created. Oryx was the latter, the Witness was the first. But who would be the third? Is there to be a third? I think this Dread leader wants to find out if it might be them. And if they are able to claim the tablet, or a fraction of its knowledge, they might be able to stand before what Oryx beheld in the deep, and perhaps what the Witness saw in the darkest corners of the Veil. And this is why I think the spirit of Oryx also comes into play with this. His spirit has been dredged from the bones of the Dreadnought, and it is a thing of heresy for the Hive to do so. but Oryx is the only one who might have complete knowledge of the Tablets of Ruin. His is the only spirit that might be able to provide such information. No other being knows the tablets because Oryx inscribed them. Perhaps only Arca itself, if it were ever to be resurrected, would hold such knowledge. But as Oryx stole the secret, and as Oryx has been directly involved, it is likely that he will be questioned about this. He is the only other one who has this information that is found on the tablets. However, his spirit would not willingly provide such information to us, so perhaps instead, it might be used by our enemies to gain the same knowledge that we acquire through the tablet. And so our battle here might be a race against time. Our goal might be to prevent the ascension of a new dark champion, a champion of a god that is even greater than the Witness. And the key to doing it might lie in our hands at the start of the season with this tablet. It's all a theory and a speculative point, and even if none of this bears out, the Tablet of Ruin is an unbelievably powerful artifact, something that I believe we should stay laser focused on. Bungie has never taken an active part of a story piece like this before and thrown it into our hands in such an active manner. It gives me hope for what the story of Heresy might be, but of course, we'll see what happens with it. Either way, when you have the tablet in your hands, keep in mind what we learn from it and what we learn from Sloane. Stay aware of what our enemies might do with its power. Look out for references to the true ruler of the Taken and for communions that they might be conducting. And, in particular, look out for the objective of this new Dread Subjugator. And if the Subjugator does manage a successful communion, if you can, listen in. We will know the nature of our enemy by the words they speak. And this one is particularly fond of the word majestic. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments section. I know that the previous episode installments have not been particularly inspiring with all of their aspects.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. I do hope you enjoyed the content.
Particularly from Revenant.
And I will see you in the next one. Again, if you haven't already subscribed to My Name is Byf on YouTube, please do so. Byf spelled BYF.
We'll see what happens.
I'll see you guys.
This is going to be the end of the Dark and Light saga regardless, and it is going to be what swings us into the new territory found in Frontiers. So, hopefully it is something worthy of our time. In the meantime though, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like. And of course, if you want more content from worlds near and far, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Parodacia Arastra. I'll see you, Starside.
Again, thank you everyone. I hope you enjoyed the stream. Thank you.